He came home to an open door, a nervous roommate, and a lie already in motion, one that was about to cost him everything he'd spent years protecting. The apartment was supposed to be quiet. Landon Brooks had been on a plane for 6 hours, his shoulder bag digging into the same bruised muscle it always found, his daughter's voice still echoing in his head from their last phone call. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" He had the answer ready. Tonight. He was coming home tonight. What he wasn't ready for was the door to his own apartment standing 3 inches open at 1 in the morning, soft lamplight leaking into the hallway, and Victoria Sinclair, his roommate, his neighbor in the truest sense of the word, the woman who paid half the rent and somehow always knew when the coffee was about to run out, sitting on the edge of the couch like she'd been caught committing a crime, which, as it turned out, was almost exactly what had happened. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's find out what Victoria did and whether Landon Brooks had any idea what he was walking into. The first thing Landon noticed was that someone had rearranged the throw pillows on the couch. It was a small thing, a stupid thing to notice. He'd just hauled himself through O'Hare, through a delay that turned a 4-hour layover into 6, through the kind of cab ride where the driver spent 40 minutes complaining about road construction and Landon had run out of polite nods somewhere around the 3rd exit. His feet hurt, his back hurt. He had a deadline on Monday morning and exactly 0 brain cells left for processing anything more complicated than finding his bed. But the throw pillows, those green and yellow ones that lived in a permanent pile in the corner of the couch because neither of them ever actually used them for anything, had been arranged, stacked neatly, like someone was trying to make the place look intentional. He stood in the doorway for a second longer than he needed to. Victoria was sitting at the far end of the couch, her knees pressed together, her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. She was still dressed, real clothes, not the oversized sleep shirt she usually had on by 10, and her hair was down, which wasn't unusual, but something about the way she was sitting said she hadn't planned to be awake. She'd been waiting, and she hadn't expected waiting to feel this complicated. "You're back," she said. "Door was open," he said. "I know. I heard you on the stairs." She set the mug down on the coffee table with the careful precision of someone who needed something to do with her hands. "I kept it open because—" She stopped. Started again. "Landon, I need to tell you something before you go to sleep." He dropped his bag inside the door and kicked it shut behind him. He didn't sit down. Some part of him registered on a frequency below conscious thought that sitting down would mean committing to whatever this was, and he wasn't ready to commit to it yet. "Okay," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "My parents are here," she said. He blinked. "Here." "In the apartment. They flew in from Boston. They didn't call ahead, but my mother never calls ahead. She thinks it's more exciting that way, which is insane, but it's her, so." Victoria pressed her fingertips against her forehead. "They're sleeping in my room. I moved to the couch, which is why the pillows are—" I was trying to make it look less like I was going to sleep sitting up. Landon looked at the hallway, then back at her. "Okay, that's fine. I can be quiet." "That's not—" She stood up. She was close to his height and bare feet, which she sometimes forgot and then remembered all at once. "That's not the part I need to tell you about." The silence between them had a particular texture, not hostile, not exactly comfortable either. The texture of 2 people who had been living 3 feet apart for 11 months and had learned each other's patterns without ever quite meaning to. "Tell me," he said. She pulled in a breath. "My mother asked who you were. When they got here, she saw your stuff, your jacket on the hook, your daughter's drawing on the fridge, the coffee maker that's obviously yours because it's twice the size of anything a normal person needs. And she asked whose apartment this was, and I said it was mine, and she asked about the jacket, and I said—" Another pause. "I said it was my boyfriend's." Landon's expression didn't change. This was something people sometimes mistook for calm. "Your boyfriend," he said. "My boyfriend." "I'm your boyfriend." "You are, according to the story I've been telling for the last 3 hours." She held his gaze. She was embarrassed. He could see that. But there was something harder underneath it. a kind of brace for impact steadiness that he associated with people who had spent a long time weathering things they didn't fully choose. I know this is completely out of line. I know I had no right to do that. But my mother walked in and immediately started talking about Daniel. That's my ex, I think I mentioned him. And how she'd run into his mother at a charity thing, and apparently he's been asking about me. And she just had this look, Landon. Like the whole visit was already a setup, like she'd been planning it, and I panicked. You panicked. I panicked, and you were the first thing I could think of because your stuff is everywhere, and you're... She gestured vaguely. You're real. She couldn't argue with a jacket on a hook. Landon was quiet for a moment. He wasn't angry. He was trying to figure out if he was angry, doing the internal inventory, and what he kept landing on instead was something more complicated, a kind of recognition. He'd seen Victoria Sinclair manage 3 simultaneous corporate crises from the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning without losing her composure. He'd watched her fire a contractor over the phone with the same even tone she used to ask if there was milk. The woman he'd spent 11 months learning the rhythms of was not, as a rule, someone who panicked, which meant this, whatever this was about her parents, about this Daniel, went somewhere deeper than she usually let things go. What does she think my name is? He asked. Victoria blinked. What? Your mother. What does she think my name is? Landon. I used your real name. I didn't build some whole elaborate fiction. I just said you were my boyfriend and you were out of town for work and you'd be back tonight. And in the morning? In the morning, they're going to want to have breakfast. With me. With you. She looked at him steadily. I'm not going to force you to do this. If you say no right now, I'll figure something out. I'll tell them we broke up tonight. I'll tell them you had a work emergency. I will deal with whatever fallout comes from that, and I won't hold it against you. She paused. But I wanted to ask, because asking seemed better than just springing it. Unlike what you did with your mother. Unlike what I did with my mother. Yes. Landon picked his bag back up, set it back down, which was not a decision so much as something his hands did while his brain caught up. The apartment was quiet. Down the hall, behind Victoria's closed bedroom door, her parents were sleeping. His daughter was at his mother's place across town, and she would be there until Sunday, and his week had been 6 consecutive days of client calls and bad hotel Wi-Fi, and a project that kept expanding at the edges no matter how many times he trimmed it. He should say no. The calculation was extremely simple. Tell me about Daniel, he said. Victoria sat back down on the couch. She picked up the mug again, seemed to remember it was cold, put it back. We were together for 3 years. He's from money, old money, the kind that comes with opinions about what you're supposed to do with your life. We got engaged, and then about 8 months into the engagement, I started actually looking at the life we were building together, and I realized... She paused, choosing the word carefully. I realized it was his life. I was just the person living in it. She shrugged, a small movement. I called off the engagement. He did not take it well. His mother and my mother are friends, which meant the fallout was social in a way that just kept going. 2 years later, and it apparently hasn't stopped. And your mother wants you back with him. My mother wants me settled. Daniel is her definition of settled. Victoria looked up at him. She thinks what I've built means nothing if I do it alone. She doesn't say it that way, but that's what she means. Landon looked at her for a long moment. Outside, a cab went by. The refrigerator hummed. You're not going to tell me what to do, he said. It wasn't a question. No, she said. It's your choice. He nodded slowly. Okay, here's what I need to know. How long are they staying? They're flying back Sunday evening. It's Friday night. Saturday morning, technically. So 2 days. 2 days. He picked up his bag again, this time with purpose. I'm going to sleep. We'll figure out the details tomorrow before they're up. He started toward his room, then stopped. One thing. She looked at him. Next time you tell your mother I'm your boyfriend, maybe give me a heads up before I've been sitting in an airport for 6 hours. Victoria exhaled, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it. Noted. He went to his room. He did not figure out immediately why he'd said yes. He lay in the dark for a while and tried to locate the decision the way you locate something you've misplaced, moving through the logic of it, expecting to find the reasonable explanation at the end. He didn't. What he found instead, somewhere in the space between exhaustion and sleep, was that the look on her face when she said "I panicked" had been entirely unguarded. And there was something about Victoria Sinclair being unguarded that he had been, without quite naming it, waiting to see. He fell asleep before he could interrogate that further. In the morning, the apartment smelled like someone else's coffee. Landon stopped in the kitchen doorway in a t-shirt and the jeans he'd grabbed off the floor because they were the closest thing available, and found two strangers at his kitchen counter. The woman had Victoria's cheekbones, sharper, older, framed by the kind of carefully maintained hair that announced significant effort, and was standing with the proprietary ease of someone who felt entitled to any room she entered. The man beside her was quieter, broader, leafing through something on his phone with the vaguely checked-out energy of a person who had long ago learned that his role in any given situation was mostly to be present. "You must be Landon," the woman said. She was already looking at him with an assessment that she didn't bother to hide. "I'm Patricia, Victoria's mother." "Good morning," Landon said. "This is her father, Robert." Robert looked up from his phone and nodded. "Morning." Landon moved to his coffee maker, the large one, which had already been used, he noticed, the carafe at about 2/3, and found a mug. Behind him, he heard the door to the bathroom open, which meant Victoria was up, which meant he had approximately 6 seconds before this became a performance. "Victoria tells us you're in project management," Patricia said. "That's right." He poured his coffee. "Infrastructure consulting, mostly. I was in Detroit this week." "And before that?" He turned around. Patricia was looking at him with pleasant, focused attention, the kind that was actually a form of pressure. "Denver, Baltimore before that." "You travel a lot." "It's the nature of the work." "And who looks after your daughter when you travel?" The question was delivered without warmth or malice, clinical almost, like a form being filled out. Landon felt the back of his neck tighten by 1 degree. "Her name is Marigold," he said. "She's 6. She stays with my mother when I'm away, and she goes to school 2 blocks from here when I'm home." He held Patricia's gaze. "She's good." Victoria appeared at the kitchen entrance in clean clothes, her hair pinned back, with the composed expression of someone who had been preparing for the last 30 minutes. "You've met," she said, which was not a question. "Just getting acquainted," Patricia said. She turned to her daughter and reached out to adjust something invisible on the collar of Victoria's shirt, a gesture that was technically affectionate and somehow entirely about control. "Your father and I thought we'd go to that brunch place you mentioned, the one on Wicker Park." "Lula Cafe," Victoria said. "That's a little far for this morning, Mom. Let's just eat here." "I was hoping to see the neighborhood." "You've seen the neighborhood." Patricia looked at Landon. "What do you think, Landon? Is Lula Cafe too far?" It was a small thing, redirecting the question to him, pulling him into the geometry of the conversation. But it was intentional. He could see that clearly. Patricia was deciding things about him in real time, and the calibration was very much still in progress. "I think it depends on whether we want to deal with the Saturday wait," he said. "They're usually backed up an hour by 9. There's a place on Milwaukee that's just as good in half the distance." Victoria looked at him with something brief and grateful. Patricia considered this. "Fine," she said. "We'll try your suggestion." Robert put his phone in his pocket and said, for the first time, something that wasn't a single word. "I'd like to try the eggs." Everyone looked at him. "They always have good eggs at these places," he said. "Then eggs it is," Landon said. The place on Milwaukee was called Hendricks and Company, and it was the kind of neighborhood spot that had survived 2 rounds of gentrification by being consistently excellent without trying to be anything more than what it was. Mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu, the particular warmth of a room that was always slightly too full. Landon had been coming here for 3 years. The woman at the host stand, a tall Jamaican woman named Claire, who had the memory of an elephant for regulars, saw him walk in and immediately held up 4 fingers. "Your usual table's free," Claire said. "Thanks, Claire." "Who's the crowd?" She was already moving. Family, he said. The word landed oddly. He kept his voice level. They got the corner table near the window. Patricia sat across from Victoria. Robert sat across from Landon. The menus came, and for a few minutes the table had the particular piece of people performing the act of choosing food. A temporary truce. "How long have you two been living together?" Patricia asked, without looking up from her menu. Victoria answered without hesitation. 8 months. And before that you were, what, dating first? We were friends first, Landon said. The living situation came out of convenience that turned into something more. This was, as it happened, almost entirely true. They had been friends first, or something like it. 11 months ago, he'd responded to a Craigslist post about splitting a 2-bedroom in Logan Square, partly because his rent situation had become untenable, and partly because his old place had too many corners that reminded him of being married. Victoria Sinclair had opened the door in a blazer and bare feet, looked at his references for about 30 seconds, and said, "When can you move in?" They'd worked out the logistics of the apartment with the efficiency of two people who were used to managing things, established quiet hours and coffee agreements, and a policy about guests, and somewhere in the ordinary business of sharing space they had become, genuinely, without planning to, something closer than strangers. Whether they'd become something closer than friends was a question Landon had been declining to answer for several months. "Convenience," Patricia repeated. She set her menu down. "That's an interesting way to describe how a relationship begins." "I said the living situation came out of convenience," Landon said. "The relationship was something else." Patricia's eyes moved between them. Victoria was looking at her menu. "And what does that mean? Something else?" "Mom," Victoria said, "I'm asking." "It means," Landon said, "that some things don't have a simple origin story. They just start, and by the time you realize they've started, they've already gone somewhere." The table was quiet. Robert was looking at the window. Patricia was looking at Landon. He held her gaze without animosity, just steadily, the way he held most things. "That's almost poetic," Patricia said. "Dad always says I should have been a writer," he said. "I tell him the money's better in infrastructure." Robert laughed. It was unexpected, a genuine bark of amusement that seemed to surprise even him, and it cracked something in the surface of the morning. Victoria looked at her father with a warmth that Landon caught in his peripheral vision. He filed it away. The food came and the conversation loosened. Robert did, in fact, order eggs, a proper skillet with sausage and a side of toast, and ate them with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a man whose requirements were straightforward. Patricia asked about Landon's work with a continued directness that he understood was not hostility, but rather her particular mode of attention. She was a woman who had formed opinions before she had information, and she was now acquiring information to see if the opinions required adjustment. He found this on some level recognizable. He'd known people like this. He answered her questions the way he'd learned to answer difficult client questions. Straight, without embellishment, without defensive hedging. Where he'd grown up. What had happened with his marriage. What it was actually like to be a single father at 32. "You said your ex-wife left," Patricia said. "What does that mean for your daughter? Does she see her mother?" "Patricia," Robert said in the tone of a man who had issued this particular warning before and held no particular hope. "She sees her mother," Landon said. "It's managed. It's not perfect, but it works." He paused. "Nothing about single parenting is perfect. You just figure out what works, and you do that." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression. Not softening exactly, but adjustment. "Victoria's father travels," she said. "He was gone most of her childhood. She managed." Victoria's expression stayed neutral, but Landon noticed that she'd stopped eating. "She clearly did more than manage," he said. Victoria looked at him. "She built a company from a rented office and 3 employees," Landon said. "She manages 40-some people now, and she does it well. I see it. She's good at it." He looked at Patricia. "You should hear her on a call sometime. It's something." The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones before it. Patricia looked at her daughter with an expression that was difficult to read, layered, older than the morning, the product of a long history that Landon was only glimpsing the edges of. Victoria looked at her plate. She never liked being praised, Patricia said, even as a girl. Because the praise always came with a condition, Victoria said quietly, like a receipt. The table went still. Robert set his fork down. This was not, Landon understood, the first time this sentence had been in the room. It had been there before, many times before. It just hadn't been said out loud in front of a third party. That's not fair, Patricia said. Her voice was controlled. It's true, Victoria said. She looked up. You never just praised anything, Mom. There was always the next thing attached. You graduated. Now what? You started a company. When are you going to settle down? I could never just be somewhere without you already looking at where I was supposed to be going. That's called wanting more for your children. That's called never being enough. Victoria's voice was even, not angry. There was no heat in it, which somehow made it more final. I know you think they're the same thing. They're not. Robert looked at his eggs. Patricia looked at her daughter. Landon looked at the window and gave them the privacy of his attention being somewhere else. After a moment, Patricia picked up her coffee. I'm not going to do this in a restaurant, she said. No, Victoria agreed. We're not. The meal finished the way meals finish after things have been said. With the careful maintenance of ordinary conversation, questions about weather and logistics and plans for the afternoon. But something had shifted. Landon could feel it in the way Victoria sat, less braced somehow, though no less guarded. Like the things she'd been dreading saying had been said, and the catastrophe she'd been expecting hadn't arrived. Not yet, anyway. Saturday afternoon settled into the particular awkward rhythm of people sharing space who hadn't planned to. Patricia announced she wanted to see the farmers market at Logan Square, and Robert said he'd stay back and rest, which was clearly a statement about his preferred relationship to farmers markets generally. Victoria went with her mother. Landon stayed with Robert, which was either fortunate or deeply uncomfortable depending on how you looked at it. Robert sat in the armchair near the window with his book and his refilled coffee and seemed prepared to stay there indefinitely, which Landon respected. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and tried to make progress on the Monday deadline, and mostly failed because his concentration had the texture of wet sand. After about an hour, Robert said, without looking up from his book, "How much of it is real?" Landon stopped typing. Robert turned a page. "I'm not asking to make trouble. I'm asking because I'm her father, and I've been watching you two this morning, and I'm curious." Landon looked at the man. Robert had the same eyes as Victoria, dark brown, observant, and with a quality of patience that you didn't often see. He wasn't like Patricia. He wasn't running an assessment. He was just asking. "That's a complicated question," Landon said. "Most honest questions are." Landon sat back. Outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. "I genuinely care about her," he said. "I have for a while. What form that takes is..." He shook his head. "Still being figured out." Robert nodded. He turned another page. "That's probably the most honest thing anyone said in this apartment since we got here." He paused. "Patricia's harder to read than she acts. She wants things for Victoria. She doesn't always know how to want them in a way that doesn't feel like pressure." I got that impression. "Victoria's never brought anyone home. Not since Daniel." He looked up for the first time. "That means something, whatever the circumstances." Landon held his gaze. "It might." Robert went back to his book. "Make sure the project manager part of you doesn't overthink the rest of it," he said. "Sometimes things are simpler than the logistics suggest." Landon didn't answer. He looked back at his laptop screen. He thought about that for a long time without typing. Yep. Victoria got back from the farmer's market carrying a paper bag and the particular look of someone who had survived something. "How was it?" Landon asked. "She bought 4 kinds of jam," Victoria said. "She doesn't eat jam." Stress response? "Stress shopping. Close enough." She set the bag on the counter. She looked tired in a way that the morning hadn't yet shown. "My mother is sorry, by the way. She's not going to say that. But she bought jam, and she bought the expensive kind, so..." Noted. Victoria leaned against the counter and looked at him. Her hair had come half out of its pin over the course of the afternoon, and she hadn't bothered fixing it. "Thank you. For this morning. For what you said about the company. I meant it." "I know you did." That's why it helped. He was at the kitchen table. She was 3 feet away at the counter. The apartment was quiet. Robert had retreated to Victoria's room to rest. The door closed. It was the first time they'd been alone since before the morning had started, and the silence had a different quality than the evening before, more settled, more aware of itself. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "The thing you said at breakfast, about the praise coming with a receipt." He met her eyes. "How long have you been carrying that?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Since I was probably 12. A small exhale. "I was a good student, really good, and every time I did something well, my mother would celebrate it and then immediately redirect to the next thing I was supposed to be working on. Like the achievement was never the destination. It was just evidence I was on track for the next goal." She picked at the edge of the paper bag. "I spent a long time thinking that meant there was something wrong with me, that I was never quite finished enough. It took me a while to understand that wasn't about me." "Does she know that's what she does?" "She thinks she's motivating me." "That's not the same thing." "No," Victoria said. "It's not." She looked at him. "Your turn." "What?" "You asked me something real. Ask me if that wasn't it, and I'll tell you it wasn't. But if that was the real question, then it's your turn." He considered this. "The marriage," he said. She waited. "I was 25 when Marigold was born. We weren't ready. Neither of us were, but we convinced ourselves we were, the way people do. Tara, my ex-wife, she tried. For a long time she really tried. But she'd had plans for herself that didn't include stopping at 25 and becoming somebody's mom. And I think watching those plans get smaller made her—" He stopped. "I don't blame her. That's the honest version. I understand why she left. I just couldn't make Marigold understand it, and I'm still not entirely sure how to." Victoria was very still. "How old is she now?" 6. "What did she ask?" "She asked why Mommy lives in a different house." He looked at the table. "Kids that age, they don't ask why in the abstract. They ask why in the specific. Why does she live somewhere else instead of here? And you have to answer that in a way that doesn't leave them carrying something they shouldn't have to carry." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that sometimes grown-ups have to figure out their own lives separately, that it didn't change what Tara felt for her, that some families are shaped differently than other families, and ours is shaped this way, and this shape is ours." He paused. She seemed to accept that, for now. "You're a good father." He looked up. She wasn't saying it as a compliment the way people said it to be kind. She was saying it as an observation, the way you note that a thing is built correctly. "I try to be," he said. "No," she said. "You are." Halt. Saturday evening, Patricia made dinner. This was announced without discussion or negotiation. She simply went through the refrigerator and the cabinets and materialized a pasta dish and a salad that were objectively excellent. And Landon suspected this was also a form of apology, just like the jam. Robert helped by filling water glasses and staying out of the way with great intentionality. The four of them sat at the kitchen table, which was not designed for four, which meant they were closer together than they might otherwise have chosen. The dinner was good, and the conversation was careful. Stories about Victoria's childhood, places Robert had traveled for work, a long discussion between Landon and Robert about the Cubs that Patricia and Victoria both ignored with symmetric disinterest. Halfway through dinner, Patricia said, "My friend Margaret's son is getting married next spring. The engagement party is in November." Victoria passed the salad to Landon. "That's nice. He was one of Daniel's groomsmen. The wedding was before everything." The table recalibrated its temperature by a few degrees. "Daniel asked Margaret's son about you," Patricia continued. "Apparently he's still—" "Mom, I'm just passing along what Margaret told me. I don't want to hear what Daniel's still anything," Victoria said. Her voice was level and final. "I don't want to hear what he's doing or thinking or asking about. I have made that clear. He's doing well for himself. He was always doing well for himself. That was never the problem." Victoria set her fork down. "The problem was that I wasn't allowed to be doing well for myself at the same time. You know that. You watched it." Patricia's jaw tightened. "I watched you walk away from a perfectly good—" "I walked away from a perfectly good cage," Victoria's voice did not rise. "And I am not going back into one. Not for Daniel. Not for you. Not for the sake of what it looks like to Margaret or anyone else." The table was quiet. Outside, a siren passed and faded. Robert said quietly, "Patricia." Patricia looked at her husband. Something moved between them, the compressed private language of a long marriage. She picked up her fork. She ate. She did not bring up Daniel again. Landon, for his part, said nothing. He ate his pasta. Under the table, Victoria's knee was 2 inches from his, and at some point during the silence it moved closer, until they were touching. Not reaching, not intentional, just the proximity of people who had been orbiting each other long enough that the orbit had gotten smaller. He did not move away. Neither did she. Later that night, after her parents had gone to bed, Victoria found him on the small balcony off the living room. He was out there with a beer, watching the street below. Logan Square on a Saturday night. Groups of people moving between bars, someone's music from an open window. The ordinary, dense life of a city that never fully went quiet. She sat in the other chair without asking. He didn't turn. "You okay?" "I'm okay." She pulled her knees up. She'd changed into the oversized sleep shirt finally, the one she usually had on by 10. "I'm sorry about dinner." "Don't be. It always goes there. I always think this time it won't, and it always does." "Because she's still trying to solve a problem that isn't yours to solve," he said. "She wants to fix something in you that isn't broken." Victoria looked at him. "The thing with Daniel," he said. "She's scared. Not of you being alone, but she's scared of what it means that you made a choice that looked like loss. Because if you could do that, choose the smaller, harder thing over the easier, bigger thing, then maybe the choices she made look different." She was very quiet. "I'm projecting," he said. "I do that sometimes." "No," she said. "You're not." They sat there for a while. The street noise carried up. Somewhere above them, a neighbor's window closed. "Landon," she said. "Yeah." "Why did you actually say yes? Last night, when I asked?" He was quiet for a moment. He took a drink of his beer. He thought about the throw pillows, about her face when she said I panicked, unguarded and tired, and somehow younger than the face she wore when she was in charge of something. "Because you were scared," he said. "And you asked instead of just expecting." She looked at him for a long time. "That shouldn't be the bar," she said. "It's a higher bar than you think." She turned back to the street. He turned back to the street. The night was warm for the season, the kind of warmth that felt borrowed, like it knew it wasn't supposed to last. "I'm glad you were the one who answered that ad," she said. "The Craigslist thing, 11 months ago. 47 other people answered it. I know. I vetted them all." A pause. "You were the only one who brought your daughter's picture to the meeting." He turned and looked at her. "Framed," she said. "You had it in your bag. It fell out when you were getting your references. You picked it up and you put it in your front pocket instead of back in the bag, like..." She stopped. "Like you wanted her close while you were having an important conversation." He didn't know what to say. "I decided then," she said simply. They sat in the quiet. Below, the city continued being itself, unreduced, unpretty, busy with its own continuance. Landon finished his beer. Victoria sat with her knees to her chest and her hair loose, and her face pointed at something in the middle distance that wasn't the street. He did not examine what he was feeling. Not yet. There was more weekend to get through first, but he sat with it anyway, the way you sit with a thing that is real before you know its name. Sunday morning arrived with the sound of Patricia making coffee and the particular weight of a weekend that was almost over. Landon woke early, before anyone else, and stood in the kitchen drinking the first cup in the quiet of a house that belonged to him the way houses belong to people who have organized their lives into them over time, incrementally, without ceremony, until the arrangement is simply what home means. He thought about Marigold, who he'd talked to on the phone yesterday afternoon in his room while the family was occupied, who had told him at great and enthusiastic length about a frog she had named Gerald, who lived near his mother's back porch. He was still thinking about Gerald the frog when Patricia appeared in the kitchen in a robe, moving with the careful quiet of a woman who was aware she was a guest in someone else's space, which was, he thought, probably new for her. She looked at him. He looked at her. "There's enough for 2 cups," he said, gesturing at the carafe. She poured herself a mug and stood at the counter across from him, and for a minute neither of them said anything. The morning light was doing the thing it did in this kitchen on clear days, coming through the east window at a long angle, making the ordinary objects on the counter look specific and chosen. "She's happy," Patricia said. I'm not always good at seeing that when it's in front of me, but she is." He didn't respond immediately. He waited, the way you wait when someone is saying something that is costing them something. "I'm not always easy to have as a mother," she said. "I'm aware of that." "I imagine she's not easy to have as a daughter either," he said. "The amount of self she's got. Where do you think that came from?" Patricia looked at him over the rim of her mug. "She pushes back because she learned to," he said. "Someone taught her it was worth doing." Patricia considered this for a long moment. Then she said, "You're clever." "I'm just paying attention." "That's the same thing, mostly." He smiled. She didn't quite smile back, but something in her expression settled. "Don't disappoint her," she said. Not as a threat, as a statement of stakes. "I'll do my best not to." She nodded once and took her coffee to the window. The morning continued around them, ordinary, unresolved, carrying all the things the weekend had put into it forward into the week. And Landon stood in the kitchen that had been his for almost a year, in the life he had built from what remained after the life before it ended, and felt something that had no clean name pressing against the inside of his chest, warm, complicated, and not going anywhere. He didn't try to name it. He just let it be there. Patricia and Robert's cab pulled away from the curb at 4:17 on Sunday afternoon. Landon watched it from the window above the street, one hand on the frame, the curtain pulled back just enough. Victoria stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the small exhale of relief she let out when the cab turned the corner and disappeared. They stood there for a second after. Neither of them moved. "They're gone," he said. "They're gone," she confirmed. Then she walked to the couch, dropped onto it face first, and didn't move. He watched her for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water, because that was the kind of thing you did when the weekend had ended and the performance was over and 2 people needed something simple to hold. He set 1 glass on the coffee table near her head. She turned her face sideways, one eye looking at the glass, one eye pressed into the cushion. "That bad?" he said. "It's not bad," she said, the words slightly muffled. "It's just a lot. She's always a lot. Even when she's being decent, she's a lot." She pushed herself up to sitting and reached for the water. "Say, thank you for all of it, the whole weekend." "You already thanked me." "I know. I'm thanking you again." He sat in the armchair. The apartment had a particular quality now, the specific silence of a space returning to itself after being occupied by too many people, the air slowly settling back into its usual arrangement. Someone's forgotten umbrella was propped against the wall near the door. He'd mention it to Victoria later. "Your father's good," he said. She smiled at that, a real one, small and quick. "He is. He learned a long time ago that the easiest way to survive being married to my mother is to be very good at staying out of the way." A pause. "That's not fair to him. He picks his moments. He just doesn't waste them. He told me not to overthink the project management side of things." Victoria turned and looked at him. "What does that mean?" "I think he meant me," Landon said. She looked at him for a beat. Then she looked at her glass. "He liked you. I could tell. My mother liked you too. She's not going to say that either, but she did. She asked you harder questions than she asks most people, and you didn't flinch." She turned the glass slowly in her hands. "She respects people who don't flinch." "She's not so bad," he said. "She just loves you in the only way she knows, and the way she knows is a lot." Victoria was quiet. Outside, the city was doing its Sunday late afternoon thing. Slower than Saturday, more domestic, the sound of it lower in pitch. Someone a few floors up was playing music that was almost but not quite identifiable. "I keep thinking about what I said at breakfast," she said, "about the receipt." Seemed like it needed to be said. It did. She set the glass down. "It also scared me. I don't usually do that. Say the real thing in front of people." In front of me, he said. She looked at him again. In front of anyone. But, yeah. She tucked one leg under her on the couch. You make it easier than it should be. That's a compliment and also slightly alarming. He laughed. Just a short one, but real. I'll take it. The afternoon moved around them. At some point, Victoria's phone buzzed and she looked at it and put it face down on the cushion, which meant it was work and she was choosing not to deal with it, which was unusual enough that Landon noticed. She didn't say anything about it. He didn't ask. They sat in the settled quiet the way they'd learned to sit together over 11 months. Not in the absence of things to say, but in the presence of enough comfort that silence didn't require filling. Eventually, she picked up the phone after all and looked at it. He watched her expression shift, something flattening behind the eyes. What? He said. She turned the phone over in her hand. My mother texted. She's already in the cab to the airport. She looked at the screen. She said, and I quote, "He's good for you. Don't make it complicated." Landon was quiet. That's the closest she's ever come to approving of any choice I've made that she didn't suggest first, Victoria said. High bar, he said. Extremely high bar. She set the phone down again. Don't make it complicated, she repeated, to the room more than to him, like she was trying the sentence out, checking its weight. He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at some middle distance that had something in it she was working through alone, which was her way, and he knew her well enough now to let her have it. He got up and went to his room to call Marigold. His daughter answered on the second ring in the way she always answered, at maximum volume, as if the phone might stop working if she didn't use her full voice. Daddy! Hey, Ladybug. Gerald is gone, she announced. We looked everywhere. Gerald the frog? He was on the porch this morning, and then he wasn't. Grandma says he went to find his family, but I think he's just somewhere hiding and we didn't look good enough. That's probably it. Frogs are good at hiding. Can we look for him when you come home? I'll be there in an hour. An hour is forever. An hour is 60 minutes, and you've survived many of those already. She seemed to consider this philosophically. Daddy? Yeah? Is your trip done now? My trip's been done since Friday. I've been home. Then why aren't you here? He sat on the edge of his bed. Through the wall, he could hear Victoria moving in the kitchen, the small domestic sounds of someone beginning to put together dinner, the refrigerator opening and closing, the cabinet with the pots. I had some things to help a friend with, he said. But I'm coming now. I'll tell you about it in the car. Is the friend okay? The friend is okay. He paused. You know Victoria? From the apartment? The one with the good shampoo smell? He smiled at the ceiling. She has a specific name for it, but sure. Her parents came to visit and she needed help and I helped her. Oh. Marigold processed this. Did they have a frog? They did not have a frog. That's sad. There's a lot of perspectives on that, but okay. She laughed, her specific laugh, the one that built on itself, and he felt the particular gravity of it in his chest, the thing that had been pulling him toward home for 2 days. 1 hour, he said. I'll be there. We'll look for Gerald. 1 hour is so long, though. 60 minutes, Ladybug, counting from now. He hung up. He sat for a moment on the edge of the bed in the room that was his, in the apartment that was also Victoria's, listening to the sounds of her in the kitchen. Then he got up and went to tell her he was picking up his daughter. She was standing at the stove with a wooden spoon, which she was using to move something around a pan with the tentative focus of someone who cooked with intent, but not always with confidence. She looked up when he came in. I'm going to get Marigold, he said. I'll be back in a couple hours. Okay. She looked back at the pan. I'm making too much of whatever this is anyway. I always make too much because I always forget I'm only cooking for one. He stopped. We could eat before I go. I thought you were going in an hour. It'll take 45 minutes to finish. That leaves 15. She looked at him, then at the pan, then back at him. I haven't finished the sauce. I can do the sauce. You don't know what sauce I'm making. Then tell me. She was quiet for a second. Then she handed him the spoon and stepped aside and said, Garlic, olive oil, cherry tomatoes. The tomatoes need to blister before anything goes in. I see cherry tomatoes not blistering. I was getting there. He turned the heat up by one notch. She watched him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether to say something, and then she went and got 2 glasses of wine from the bottle she'd opened the previous night and was apparently finishing tonight, and she handed him one, which he set on the counter because his hands were occupied. They made dinner together in a small kitchen that required them to move around each other with the ease of a practiced pattern, which it was, because they'd been doing exactly this, in variations, for nearly a year, reaching around without looking, knowing which cabinet held which thing, understanding that the drawer with the good spatulas stuck and required a specific amount of upward pressure. Small knowledge, accumulated, specific, belonging to this apartment and this version of their lives. It was ordinary. It was also, Landon noticed, the most comfortable he'd felt in 4 days. They ate standing at the counter because there wasn't time to set the table properly, and the food was better than either of them expected, and Victoria said so, and he agreed, and they argued briefly and without heat about whether the tomatoes needed more salt, which they didn't, and the whole thing was over in 20 minutes. He rinsed his plate. She rinsed hers. He picked up his jacket. "Tell Marigold I said hi," she said. "She'll want to know if you found any frogs." Victoria's eyebrow went up. "She named one Gerald. It's a whole thing." "Tell her if Gerald shows up here, I'll let her know. That will make her extremely happy." He left. He drove across town to his mother's house in the November dusk, parked in front of the old 2-flat that still had the same peeling paint on the porch railing that it had had when he was 12, and got out of the car and barely had time to close the door before Marigold was down the porch steps and running at him in the way 6-year-olds run, fully committed, not managing velocity, just going. He caught her. She smelled like his mother's detergent and something crayon adjacent. She talked without pausing all the way back up the porch. His mother stood in the doorway and looked at him and said, "You look tired," which was her standard greeting and also accurate. "I'm okay," he said. "You look like you've been managing something all weekend." "I've been helping a friend." His mother had a very specific look. She was using it. "Is the friend okay?" "The friend is okay." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom." "You keep saying fine the way people say fine when they mean something else." She moved aside to let them in. "You want tea?" "I want sleep." "You can want both." She went to the kettle. Marigold had already disappeared toward her temporary bedroom, chasing some new urgency. His mother filled the kettle and set it on the burner and looked at him where he sat at the kitchen table. "You've been thinking about the Sinclair girl," she said. He looked up. "Don't make that face," she said. "You've mentioned her in every conversation for 6 months. Her name just appears. Like weather. It's not like that." "I didn't say what it was like, I just said her name appears." The kettle started its preliminary hissing. "What happened this weekend?" He told her. Not everything. Not the balcony, not the knee under the table. But the structure of it. The parents, the fake relationship, the breakfast, the dinner with Daniel's name in it like a stone dropped in water. His mother listened with the specific attention that was her gift, and also sometimes her weapon. When he'd finished, she poured the tea and set a mug in front of him. "So you spent the weekend pretending to be in love with someone you're not pretending to be in love with," she said. He wrapped his hands around the mug. "That must have been exhausting," she said. "All that pretending." "It was fine." There's that word again. She sat down across from him. "Landon, you have been alone for 4 years. You have done a good job of it. You have raised that girl well, and you have built yourself back up after a hard thing. I am proud of you, and I also know what it looks like when you're protecting something." "Mom, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just—" She put her hand briefly on his forearm. "Don't protect yourself out of something good. That's all I'm saying." Marigold reappeared in the kitchen holding a drawing of what appeared to be a frog. "I made Gerald," she announced, "in case he doesn't come back, so we remember him." Landon looked at the drawing. The frog had 6 legs and very intense eyes and was outlined in purple crayon. "That's a good Gerald," he said. "Can Victoria see it?" He looked at his daughter. "Why?" Marigold shrugged with the totality that only small children can muster. "You said she said hi, so she's nice, and Gerald is important." His mother was looking at him over her mug with an expression that contained a full editorial. "Sure," he said. "We can show her." Haute. The following week was normal, which made it strange. They moved back into their usual rhythms without discussing it. Coffee in the morning, the particular timing of the bathroom, the way they both gravitated to the kitchen in the early evening and sometimes cooked and sometimes didn't, and talked about their days in the fragmented, non-linear way of people who were tired and comfortable and didn't need to perform attention for each other. The weekend had happened, and then the weekend was over, and the apartment was the same apartment it had always been, except that it wasn't quite. The difference was not large. It was the kind of difference you notice in familiar light. The same room, the same objects, but the angle has shifted by 5 degrees and everything looks specific in a way it hadn't before. On Monday, he was on calls from 8 to 5. On Monday evening, she had a board thing and came home late, and he'd left her a plate in the refrigerator because he'd made too much pasta. And in the morning, she said thank you, and he said it was nothing, and it wasn't nothing, but it was the kind of nothing that accumulated. On Wednesday, she had a bad day. He could tell from the particular way she opened the apartment door. Not sharp, not slammed, but with the controlled deliberateness of someone managing a significant internal weather system. She came in, put her bag on the hook, stood in the entryway for 2 full seconds, doing nothing. He was on the couch with a draft contract he was reviewing. He looked up. "Don't ask," she said. "Okay." She went to her room. He went back to the contract. 20 minutes later, she came out in the sleep shirt, poured herself a glass of water, stood at the counter drinking it, and then said without preamble, "I had to let someone go today." He put the contract down. "How long had they been with you?" 4 years. She refilled the glass. "She wasn't performing. I knew it for 6 months, and I kept hoping it would turn, and it didn't, and today was the day I couldn't put it off anymore." She leaned against the counter. She cried. "That's hard. I hate crying. I know it's a natural response. I'm not cold about it. When someone cries at me, I don't know what my face is supposed to do." "Your face was probably fine." "My face was probably terrifying. I could feel it going somewhere neutral, and I couldn't stop it." She set the glass down. "I gave her a good exit package. I was decent about it. It was still awful. It's supposed to be awful. If it wasn't awful, you'd be the kind of boss no one should work for." She looked at him. Something in her expression eased slightly. "Come sit down," he said. She came and sat at the other end of the couch. Not far. The couch wasn't wide enough for far, but her own end. She pulled her knees up. He picked up the contract and then put it back down because it was clearly not the moment. "Can I ask you something work-related?" she said. "Sure." "Do your clients ever push back on your assessments, even when you've given them every reason to trust you?" "Weekly?" "How do you deal with it without losing your mind?" He thought about this. "I stopped trying to make them trust me and started showing them the data in a way they could verify themselves. If they can check the work, the trust follows. If it doesn't, then the problem is something else, and it was never going to be solved by my being more convincing." She was quiet for a moment. "My board thinks the Q4 projections are too aggressive." "Are they?" "No, they're accurate. I've been conservative, actually." She tapped her finger against her knee. But 2 of the members, both of whom came in post-Series B, so they weren't there for the build, they look at the numbers and they see ambition, not math. And arguing with someone who's already decided you're being ambitious feels like arguing with the weather, he said. "Yes, exactly." She turned sideways to look at him, one arm over the back of the couch. "What do you do with that?" "I stop arguing. I present the methodology. I let the methodology do the arguing while I talk about something else." He turned to look at her. "You're trying to persuade them out of a feeling by showing them facts. But the feeling is the thing they're actually protecting. Show them that you share the risk." She looked at him steadily. "What does that mean, practically?" "Tie something of yours to it. Show them that if you're wrong, you lose something real. People trust differently when the person presenting the case has skin in the game." She was still looking at him. Her expression had gone thoughtful in the particular way it went when she was filing something, not just considering it, but storing it. "That's actually useful," she said. "I have occasional moments." "Occasional?" "I'm not going to talk myself up." She smiled. "A small one, the kind that happened without advance notice." "Thank you." for the advice, and she gestured vaguely at the general situation. Being here, I live here. I know. She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. That's what I mean. He didn't say anything. She turned back forward on the couch, her knees still up, her shoulder now 3 inches from his. They stayed like that for a while. He picked the contract back up but didn't read it. She looked at the middle distance she was good at looking at when she was processing. This was, he thought, the strange thing about the week. The weekend had moved something, not dramatically, not in the way of scenes and declarations, but in the way of very old ice, the kind that moves so slowly you don't see it shift until you look at where it used to be and realize it's somewhere else now. He was aware of her differently. That was the simplest way to put it. Not newly. The awareness wasn't new, had not been new for a while, was something he'd been managing at a careful distance the way you keep your hands from a hot surface, not because you're afraid of it, but because you understand the nature of the heat. The weekend had made the distance feel different, not smaller necessarily, but less comfortable, less sustainable. On Thursday morning, she left before he was up, which happened sometimes, and she left a sticky note on the coffee maker that said, "Sorry, had to run early. There's grounds already measured." He made his coffee with the grounds she'd measured and stood in the morning kitchen and looked at the sticky note for a moment longer than was warranted. He put it in the recycling. Then he took it out and put it on the counter. He did not examine this. Friday evening, she came home with 2 grocery bags and a specific intention about dinner, which was new. Usually dinner was casual and accumulated, whatever was available, assembled with varying degrees of effort. This was deliberate. He could see the deliberateness in the way she organized the bags on the counter. "What are we making?" he said. "Chicken, with the thing with the capers." "You know a thing with capers?" "I'm learning a thing with capers. I watched 3 videos this week." She started unpacking. "I have been stress cooking in my head all week, and I need to actually do it now." He leaned against the counter. "What are we stress cooking about?" "Board meeting is next Thursday. I'm building the presentation." She handed him a bag of garlic. "Mince this?" "I can mince garlic." "I know you can. That's why I handed it to you." He found the cutting board. She found the skillet. They worked in the easy parallel of a practiced arrangement. Him at the board, her at the stove, the radio on at a volume low enough to be texture rather than interruption. "The board thing," he said, working the garlic. "Are you using the methodology angle?" "I'm trying to. It's harder than it sounds." "Everything is harder than it sounds." "I keep wanting to just explain myself, make them understand, and you can't do that. I know you can't do that, but the impulse is still there." She poured oil into the pan. "I'm not good at being doubted." "Nobody is. I'm especially not good at it." She didn't say this as a confession so much as an observation about a known characteristic. "I know why, probably. My mother doubted everything for long enough that I started performing certainty as a reflex. If you're already sure enough for 2 people, no one can get to you." "That's exhausting to maintain." "It is." She watched the oil heat. "It also works, most of the time, except with people who mistake certainty for arrogance." "Are they wrong?" She turned and looked at him. "I'm asking seriously," he said. "Is there a reading of you that's fair?" She was quiet for a moment. "There are things I'm sure of because I've earned the certainty. And there are things I'm sure of because being uncertain feels like an opening." She turned back to the stove. "The board can't always tell the difference. Sometimes I can't either." He swept the minced garlic to one side of the board and looked at it. "The presentation should lead with the uncertainty," he said. "Not the certainty. Show them where you think you might be wrong and why you're betting on the projections anyway. People trust judgment more than they trust confidence." She was still. "If you open with, 'Here's what I know,' they'll look for holes. If you open with, 'Here's what I don't know, and here's why I believe we're right anyway,' there's nothing to find holes in. You've already named them." She turned around. She was looking at him with the expression she got when something had landed precisely. "You're good at this," she said. "At what?" "At seeing how things should be arranged." She held his gaze. "Not just work things." The oil was starting to smoke slightly. She turned back to the stove and adjusted the heat, and the moment shifted, as moments do, into the ongoing business of cooking dinner. But it lingered at the edge of the room, the way things do when they've been said in good faith and don't require response. They ate at the table this time, properly, with the candle she'd found in a drawer lit in the middle because she said it looked better, and he didn't argue. The chicken was good. The capers worked. She was pleased about it, and he told her so, and she said she was going to try the video person's carbonara next, which was ambitious, but he chose not to say so. Marigold's drawing of Gerald the Frog was still on the refrigerator where he'd put it on Monday. Victoria had come home that night to find it there, and stood at the fridge looking at it, and then turned to him with an expression that was soft in a way she didn't often allow in direct view, and said, "6 legs?" And he said Gerald had a lot going on, and she'd laughed. A real one, unmanaged, the kind that changed her whole face. He thought about that laugh over dinner, while she was talking about the carbonara plans. He thought about his mother's hands on his forearm, and the things she'd said about protecting yourself out of something good. He thought about the feeling that had been pressing against the inside of his chest for a week now. Warm, complicated, increasingly inconvenient. He thought about the fact that they were two people who had told a lie for a weekend, and the lie had ended, and none of the feeling had gone with it. "Hey," she said. He refocused. "Sorry. You went somewhere." "I'm back." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression. Awareness, he thought, of the same territory. The same careful distance and what it was costing to maintain it. "The board presentation," she said, returning to something safer. "Will you look at it before Thursday?" "Send it when it's ready." "I might argue with your notes. You argue with most things. Only when I'm right." "Which is often enough to be statistically significant," he said. She looked pleased about that in a way she didn't entirely conceal. She picked up her wine. He picked up his water. Outside, the November night was doing its thing, cold and particular and full of the sound of a city that continued regardless. He looked at her across the table. She was looking at her wine. He had the brief, specific thought that this table was the right size, that the candle was in a good position, that there was nowhere else he'd rather be than in this apartment on this evening with this woman who was not his girlfriend and was also becoming very difficult to think of as simply his roommate. He did not say any of this. He picked up his fork and went back to the chicken, and the conversation moved forward the way conversations do between people who are in the middle of something they haven't yet named. But it was in the room with them. It had been all week. It wasn't going anywhere. The board presentation went well. Victoria texted him from the elevator on her way out of the building. Just 3 words. They bought it. And he was in a client meeting when it came through, but he felt his phone vibrate and checked it under the table, which he never did, and read it twice before putting the phone away and going back to the conversation about load-bearing infrastructure assessments, with a focus that was slightly less complete than it had been before. When he got home that evening, she was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a glass of wine that was nearly finished and an expression he hadn't seen before. Not happy exactly, but relieved in the deep way, the way you're relieved when you've been braced for impact for a week, and the impact didn't come. She looked lighter, like something had been set down. "Tell me," he said. She looked up. "I led with the uncertainty. Like you said." She closed the laptop. "I told them the 3 things most likely to make the projections wrong, and then I walked them through exactly why I thought those things wouldn't happen and what we'd do if they did." She paused. Hartley, the one who's been the most skeptical all quarter, he asked better questions than he's ever asked, like actually engaged questions, because there was nothing to defend against. "That's the whole thing," Landon said. "You took away the opposition and replaced it with a conversation. It felt strange. I kept waiting for the floor to fall out." She turned the wine glass slowly. It didn't. He put his bag down and got his own glass. "I told you. You told me. I'm not going to say you were right in a way that becomes a pattern, but this time, yes. I'll take this time." She smiled at him. He sat down across from her, and for a moment the table between them had the quality it had the Friday before, the candle night, the specific warmth of 2 people who had been talking to each other in the practical register for long enough that the practical had become intimate without either of them planning it. Then her phone rang. She looked at it. Her expression changed, not dramatically, just a degree of tightening, the jaw, the set of her shoulders. "Who is it?" he said, though he understood from the look that he already knew the category. She turned the phone face down. "Daniel." The word sat in the room. "He's called twice this week," she said. "I haven't picked up." Landon was quiet. He turned his glass between his palms. "How did he get back to calling you?" "My mother." She said it flatly, without surprise. She must have said something to Margaret, who said something to him, about the weekend, about… A pause. "About you." "About me." He's not stupid. He knows what it means that I've moved on. It means the calculation he's been running for 2 years, that I'd eventually come back around, doesn't work anymore. She looked at the phone. "So now he's calling. What do you want to do about it?" "I want to not talk to him." She picked up the phone and put it in her bag, out of sight. "Which I'm doing." "That works for right now," Landon said. "Does he take not being called back as an answer?" She looked at him. He didn't, historically. He nodded once. He didn't say anything else about it. It wasn't his problem to solve, and she hadn't asked him to solve it, and he understood those two things clearly. But something had shifted in the room, the lightness of the board meeting relief complicated now by this other thing, this name that kept reappearing like a bill that hadn't been fully settled. They finished the wine. They talked about other things. But Daniel was in the apartment now, not as a presence, but as a problem with edges, and they both knew it. The call came on a Saturday morning 10 days later, while Marigold was at the apartment. This had happened before. Marigold spending Saturday mornings at the apartment, which had started practically, when Landon had a work call he couldn't reschedule. And Victoria had offered without being asked, with the pragmatic ease of someone solving a logistics problem rather than doing something kind, even though it was both. Marigold had arrived with her backpack and Gerald's drawing and a box of colored pencils, and Victoria had set her up at the kitchen table with paper and something to drink, and by the time Landon finished his call 45 minutes later, his daughter was explaining at considerable length and with strong conviction why purple was the superior color, and Victoria was listening with what appeared to be genuine interest. That had been 3 weeks ago. The Saturday visits had, without anyone declaring them a pattern, become a pattern. This particular Saturday, Marigold was on the living room floor with a complicated puzzle that was technically for ages 8 and up, which she had announced was not a problem because she was very smart for 6. Victoria was at the kitchen table with the carbonara research she'd been threatening since the week before. Landon was reading on the couch when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, New York area code. "Hello? Is this Landon Brooks?" The voice was male, smooth, the particular smoothness of someone who had been told since early in life that his voice was an asset. "It is," Landon said. "This is Daniel Hargrove. I'm a friend of Victoria's." A beat. "I believe we have some mutual context." Landon looked at Victoria across the room. She was looking at him now, the carbonara video forgotten. "I'm going to put you on speaker," Landon said. "That's not…" He put the phone on speaker and set it on the couch cushion. Victoria's expression went several things at once. Alarmed, then controlled, then still. "Victoria's right here," Landon said. "You can talk to both of us." The pause on the other end was brief but specific, the pause of someone recalibrating. "Victoria," Daniel said. The name came out with a softness that was performed. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," she said. Her voice was even. "I thought we could talk. It's been a while and I've been thinking about some things. About us." "There isn't an us, Daniel." "There was. A significant one." Another pause. "I've been told you've moved on. I wanted to hear it from you." "You are hearing it from me. I've moved on. With your roommate." The word came out with a very specific texture. Not hostile outright, but shaped in a way that made it an evaluation. A downgrade. A question mark applied to Landon without naming him. Landon picked up the phone and took it off speaker. He stood up. "This is Landon," he said, walking toward the kitchen and away from Marigold, who had looked up from her puzzle at the change in atmosphere. "I'm not going to get in the middle of whatever you and Victoria need to work out. but I'd ask you not to call my phone to do it. I didn't have her number. Then that's information, Landon said. If she wanted you to have it, you'd have it. A beat. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I know, Landon said, but you calling her through me is trouble regardless of what you're trying. He kept his voice neutral, not aggressive, just clear the way clear things are. She knows how to reach you if she wants to. That's where I'd leave it. He ended the call. He set the phone on the counter. He turned around. Victoria was standing 4 feet away, arms crossed, looking at him. Behind her on the living room floor, Marigold had gone back to the puzzle. You didn't have to do that, Victoria said. I know. I could have handled it. You could have, he said. You were handling it fine. He paused. He called my phone. That part was mine to deal with. She looked at him for a long moment. He's going to see that as you staking a claim. Maybe. You're not bothered by that? He held her gaze. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. She was very still. He could see her working through the layers of it, what he'd said, what it meant that he'd said it, what it would cost her to say back what she was thinking. Before she could, Marigold called from the living room, "The corner pieces are lying." They both turned. Puzzles don't lie, Victoria called back. This one does. The corners don't corner correctly. That means you have the wrong corners. But they look like corners. Victoria looked at Landon. The weight of the moment shifted sideways. She's been at this for an hour, he said. She won't give up, Victoria said. She never gives up. Victoria looked back at his daughter on the floor, who was holding a puzzle piece up to the light with the scientific scrutiny of someone checking for fraud. Something passed through Victoria's face, soft and specific, a feeling that had no name except its own. The middle pieces first, she said, moving toward the living room. Start from the middle and work out. But corners are the edges. The middle pieces have the most detail, so they're the most unique. You find them first, and then the edges follow. She sat down on the floor next to Marigold with the cross-legged ease of someone who had done this before, or who was at least committing to it. Here, find me a piece with the most colors on it. Marigold sorted immediately and with great purpose. This one. Okay, that's your anchor. Everything builds from that. Landon stood in his kitchen doorway and watched his daughter and his roommate sit on the floor and solve a puzzle together, and something turned over in his chest. Quiet, irreversible, the way the season turns. He went back to the couch. He didn't pick up his book. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later. It was from Patricia, which was not what either of them expected. A formal card, actually mailed, the paper stock thick and cream-colored, addressed to both of them, Landon Brooks and Victoria Sinclair, in handwriting that was controlled to the point of being architectural. Victoria stood in the entryway holding it. The Sinclair Family Engagement Brunch, it read, celebrating the engagement of Nathaniel Hargrove and Claire Whitfield. Sunday, December 8th, the Greystone Room at the Ashford Hotel. Nathaniel Hargrove, Landon said, Daniel's younger brother. Victoria set the card on the counter. Who is apparently engaged, and my mother apparently wants us there. She looked at the card. Both of us. She specifically addressed it to both of us. She did. Daniel will be there. He'll be the best man, Victoria said, or close to it. He and Nathaniel are close, the way families with money are close. In public, at events, with people watching. Landon picked the card up and looked at it. The Ashford Hotel. Sunday, December 8th. Less than 3 weeks away. Do you want to go? He said. She looked at him with the expression she wore when a question had been phrased in a way that made the honest answer complicated. I want to support my mother. She's known the Hargroves for years. This is significant to her, and she addressed this to both of us, which means she's... A pause. She's trying, in her way. That's not the same thing as wanting to go. No, Victoria said. It's not. She leaned against the counter. But I think I should. And I think I should go as... not alone. She looked at him steadily. I know that's a lot to ask. You're asking me to be your real boyfriend at an event where your fake ex-boyfriend will be watching. She winced slightly. That's one way to frame it. Is it inaccurate? It's very accurate. He set the card down. He was quiet for a moment, not because he was undecided, but because he was trying to understand his own certainty. He'd had 2 weeks of it growing in a direction he couldn't quite face head on. The morning coffee, the puzzle on the floor, the phone call with Daniel, the thing he'd said that wasn't untrue. He had been living alongside something true for months and calling it something else, and the card on the counter with both their names felt, absurdly, like a piece of correspondence from a future that was already in progress. "I'll go," he said. She looked at him. "But I'm not going to pretend anything," he said. "I did that once. I'm not doing it again." She was very still. "What does that mean?" "It means that if we walk into that room together, I'm not playing a character. I'm just there, as whoever I am." He held her gaze. "Is that okay?" She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Yes." The Ashford Hotel was the kind of place that had been expensive for so long it no longer needed to announce it. Dark wood, high ceilings, staff who moved with the trained unobtrusiveness of people paid to be invisible. The Greystone Room was off the main lobby, a private dining space that held perhaps 60 people, already half filled when they arrived. The sound of it, the measured hum of a certain kind of social class at a certain kind of event. Everyone was dressed in the language of understated money. Victoria was in a dark green dress he hadn't seen before, her hair up, the whole presentation assembled with the CEO precision she applied to things that mattered. She looked composed. She also had a very specific line in her jaw that he recognized as the brace for impact expression, the one from the first night of the weekend, the one that meant she was managing something at depth. He put his hand at her back as they walked in, not as performance, but because it felt like the right thing. She didn't pull away. She didn't lean into it either. She just carried it the way you carry something that belongs there. Patricia saw them from across the room and came over with the focused speed of a woman who had been watching the door. She was in navy, and she looked, he noticed, at their general configuration before she looked at either of their faces, the quick parental assessment of proximity and posture. Whatever she clocked, it seemed to settle something in her. "You came," she said, and hugged her daughter, which lasted 1 second longer than Patricia's hugs usually lasted based on the weekend sample size. "We came," Victoria said. Patricia looked at Landon. "I'm glad," she said, simply, without the layered architecture of their breakfast conversation. Just glad. "Congratulations to the family," he said. "Nathaniel is very happy. Claire is lovely." She touched Victoria's arm briefly. "Come meet her. I want you to meet her before it fills up." They were steered into the room, and for the next 20 minutes the event was just an event. Introductions, champagne, the general choreography of a family gathering where several subgroups were navigating different histories. Nathaniel was a younger, less constructed version of Daniel, with the same strong jaw but looser around the edges, genuinely warm in a way that felt earned rather than performed. Claire was bright and nervous and clearly head over heels, the kind of person who looked at their fiancé every few minutes to anchor themselves. Robert was there, quiet and pleased, with the energy of a man relieved that something was happening that didn't require him to manage anyone's feelings. And then Daniel was there. Landon felt it before he saw it. The way Victoria's posture shifted beside him, not dramatically, just a millimeter of recalibration, the same adjustment you make when something enters a room that your body registers before your brain catches up. Daniel Hargrove was tall and deliberately assembled, the kind of man who wore a suit like it was a position statement. He was good-looking in the conventional, symmetrical way of someone whose advantages had always been legible. He crossed the room with the ease of a person who had never, in his adult life, been uncertain about whether he belonged somewhere. He saw Victoria first, then he saw Landon. Then he looked at the space between them, and something in his expression reorganized. "Victoria," he said. He kissed her cheek in the European manner, the move of a man reclaiming a vocabulary. "You look extraordinary." "Thank you," she said, even, composed. "Congratulations on Nathaniel. He's over the moon." Daniel's eyes moved to Landon. "And this is—" "Landon," Landon said. He extended his hand. Daniel shook it. The handshake was the kind that measured itself. I believe we spoke on the phone. We did. You were very clear. There was something underneath this, but not hostility exactly, but the specific friction of a man unaccustomed to being clearly told a thing. It seemed like the situation called for it, Landon said. Daniel looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Victoria. I've been hoping we could talk, at some point, without intermediaries. I don't think we need to, Victoria said. Just a few minutes. There are things I'd like to say. Daniel, 5 minutes, he said. I'm not asking for more than that. The table nearby was filling. Patricia was watching from across the room with the deliberately casual attention of someone performing not watching. Robert had spotted what was happening and had the look of a man deciding whether his moment had arrived. You can say what you want to say, Victoria said. Right here. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. He looked at Landon with the specific expression of a man who wanted a private conversation and was being denied one, and was trying to decide how that reflected on him. I made mistakes, he said, still looking at Landon, then back to Victoria. When we were together, I had certain expectations that weren't fair. I understood what you were building, and I didn't make enough room for it. Victoria was quiet. I'm not asking to undo anything, Daniel continued. I just want you to know that I understand it now. What I was. And I'm different. He paused. I think we could have been something that worked. We were something, Victoria said. Her voice was steady. We were something for 3 years and it didn't work. Not because you weren't trying. I believe you were. But because the version of me that fit the life you wanted isn't the version of me that exists. She held his gaze. You would have needed me to be smaller. You wouldn't have meant to. But you would have. Daniel looked at her. Something moved in his expression. Not anger, not the thing Landon had half prepared for, something more complicated. The look of a man who had received honest information and was encountering the specific pain of recognizing it as true. You've thought about this, he said. For 2 years, she said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Landon, a longer look, the look of a man doing a real assessment, not the performance of one. You're good for her, he said. The words came out with effort. The effort made them credible. Landon didn't know what he'd expected Daniel Hargrove to be, but he hadn't expected this. The grace of it, imperfect and visible. The grace of a person saying the true thing in a situation where the easier thing was available. I'm trying to be, Landon said. Daniel nodded once. He looked at Victoria. I wish you well. I mean that. He moved back toward the center of the room. The 3 of them had been in their own world for 5 minutes, and now they were back in the general event, the hum of other conversations rising back around them. And Victoria was exhaling slowly beside him, her shoulder touching his, the green dress and the careful hair, and the exhale of a woman who had just said out loud a thing that had been finished for a long time, but had never been properly closed. You okay? He said. Yeah. She took a breath. Yeah, I am. You said it well. I was terrified. It didn't show. It always shows. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, just with the particular brightness of a person who has just spent real courage and is still upright. It just shows in a way most people don't recognize. He looked at her. He looked at her for a moment that was longer than the situation technically required, and in that moment he was aware of everything that had been building since a November weekend when he'd come home to an open door and a nervous woman on a couch. All of it, the coffee and the wine and the sticky note and the puzzle and the phone call and the dinner and the candle and the knee 2 inches from his under a table, and he was aware that they had come to a place that was no longer theoretical. She was looking at him. He said, I need to tell you something. The room continued its hum around them. Glasses clinked. Somewhere behind them, Patricia laughed at something Robert said. Okay, Victoria said. I said on the phone to Daniel, when I told him she knows how to reach you if she wants to. That was... He paused. He was not good at this in the prepared speech way. He was better at it in the doing it way. I should have said that to you first, before I said it to him. I was putting something out there that I hadn't actually asked you about. She was watching him very carefully. I've been He stopped again. He didn't look away. I've been in the vicinity of this for a while and not saying it because the apartment works and Marigold likes you and I'm 32 years old and I have been wrong about a significant thing before and the cost of that was not mine alone. So I don't move fast on things that matter. He kept her gaze. But I'm not pretending anymore. I can't do the pretending anymore. The room was all around them. They were in it and also entirely separate from it. I'm not asking you to pretend, she said. Her voice was quieter than the room, but he heard it completely. I know, he said. I know you're not. He took a breath. I'm just telling you that what I said to Daniel was real, that I'm not performing a claim, that what's been in the apartment with us for months is something I'm actually feeling. He paused. And I think you know that already. I just wanted to say it clearly. So you have the actual information. Victoria Sinclair looked at him for a long moment. Around them, 60 people moved through the ordinary business of a celebration. Nathaniel and Claire held hands near the far window. Robert had his coffee. Patricia was looking at them from across the room with an expression that she wasn't bothering to conceal. I know, Victoria said. I've known for a while. And? She looked at him with the full directness that was her particular gift and also, he understood, her particular risk. The face she showed when she had decided to stop managing the distance. And I've been waiting, she said, for you to stop being so careful that you talked yourself out of it. He exhaled. Something in him that had been braced for a long time released. I'm done being that careful, he said. Good, she said. It was not a kiss. Not here. Not in this room with her mother 15 feet away and Daniel Hargrove still visible near the bar and 60 people doing the social math of watching. But it was a declaration, clear as anything he'd ever said, and she received it without flinching, which was its own kind of answer. He took her hand. She let him. Her fingers settled against his. Not a gesture for the room, not a performance, just two people reaching the same point from opposite directions and finding it occupied by the other. Across the room, Patricia watched. She looked at their hands. She looked at her daughter's face. She turned to Robert and said something quiet. And Robert, for the second time in 2 months, laughed his unexpected bark of a laugh. The brunch continued. Champagne was poured. Nathaniel made a toast that was brief and sincere and made Claire press her face briefly into his shoulder. The room made the sound of people gathered around something good. Landon stood with Victoria's hand in his, in a room full of other people's occasion, and felt the specific weight of a decision that had already been made. Not in this moment, but in 100 smaller moments before it. Accumulated until the accumulated thing became undeniable. She leaned slightly toward him, not dramatically, just the few degrees of a person adjusting to gravity they've stopped resisting. He didn't move away. Outside the tall windows of the Greystone room, the December light was flat and silver and specific to the season, the kind of light that made everything look a little more itself, stripped of the warmth that usually softened the edges. He looked at her profile. She was watching the toast. He thought, this is real, not the performance of it, not the logistics of it, the actual thing, the specific and inconvenient and irreversible fact of it. He held her hand. She held his back. The room moved around them and they stayed exactly where they were. They didn't talk about it in the cab home, not because there was nothing to say, there was everything to say. The whole accumulated weight of what had happened in the Greystone room sitting between them on the back seat like a third passenger. But the cab driver had the radio on, and the city was doing its December thing outside the windows, gray and bright and indifferent, and sometimes the space right after a real moment needs to be left alone for a while, like a wound that hasn't decided yet whether it's serious. Victoria looked out her window. Landon looked out his. Their hands were no longer touching. They'd separated somewhere between the hotel lobby and the cab door, the transition back to ordinary life requiring ordinary configurations. But the separation had a different quality than it used to. Before, not touching had been the default state. Now it felt like a choice, like something that would have to be chosen again each time, or not. The cab stopped at a light on Michigan Avenue. Christmas lights had gone up on the trees along the median. Small white ones, the kind that didn't try to be impressive, just present. The city at this hour had the feeling of something winding down and gearing up at the same time, the Saturday evening crowd trading out for the Saturday night one. You hungry? He said. She turned from the window. A little. We could stop somewhere. She looked at him. The look lasted 2 seconds longer than the question required. Let's just go home, she said. Home. She said it the way she'd been saying it for 11 months. Naturally, without thinking, the word for the place they both lived. But tonight it landed differently, and he felt her register that it had landed differently, and she looked back out of her window without adjusting it, which was its own kind of statement. The apartment was cold when they got in. They'd left the heat low, December being what it was, and Victoria went straight to the thermostat while Landon hung up his coat and hers and stood for a moment in the entryway doing nothing in particular, the way you stand when you've arrived somewhere and haven't yet decided what arriving means. She came back from the thermostat, and they were both in the living room in their good clothes, the apartment warming up around them, the particular silence of a space that was waiting for the people in it to figure out what came next. "Do you want tea?" he said. "I want to talk," she said. He looked at her. "Not because something's wrong," she said quickly. I think we should actually do it. Say the things out loud, because I've been in situations before where I thought something was understood, and it wasn't, and then by the time I realized it wasn't, too much had been built on the misunderstanding to fix it easily. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but in the way of someone steadying themselves. "I don't want that to happen here." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She sat on the couch. He sat in the armchair, then reconsidered and moved to the other end of the couch instead, because the armchair felt like a position statement he didn't intend. She watched him relocate without comment. "You first," she said. "Why me first?" "Because you started it." He looked at the middle distance for a moment. Outside, the wind moved against the windows. That specific December sound, thin and dry. He thought about how to say the thing he'd been not saying, and then he decided that thinking about how to say it was just another form of the careful management he'd told her he was done with. "I've been aware of you for a long time," he said, "not just as my roommate, as a person I wanted to be near. And I've been managing that because," he paused, "because I'm a father first. That's not a complaint. It's just the shape of my life. When I make a decision about who I let into my life, I'm making it for two people. And the last time I made that decision badly, Marigold paid part of the cost. So I don't move on feelings without being sure of them." "Are you sure of them now?" she said. "I'm sure enough to stop pretending they don't exist," he said, "which is different from sure. But it's what I've got." She looked at him steadily. "That's honest." "I'm trying." She was quiet for a moment, her hands in her lap, the green dress and the careful hair and the whole assembled presentation of the woman she was in public beginning to relax, slightly, into the woman she was in this apartment. "I don't fall easily," she said. "I've been told that's a problem. I've been told I hold things at arm's length and call it professionalism. And some of that is true. Some of it is the thing I said at breakfast that first morning, the receipt. When someone praising you always costs you something, you learn to keep your distance from anything that might. Including good things," he said. "Especially good things." She looked at her hands, because the cost of losing a good thing is more than the cost of never having it. She looked up. "That's a bad calculation. I know it's a bad calculation. I've known it for a while. I just kept running it anyway." "What changed?" he said. She looked at him. "You didn't want anything from me." He waited. "You moved in and you paid half the rent, and you made your coffee, and you asked about my day, and you didn't want anything from it. You weren't building towards something. You weren't—" She paused, searching for the word. "You weren't investing in me because you expected a return. You were just there. Because that's who you are." She held his gaze. "I didn't know what to do with that for a long time." He was quiet. "Then I got used to it," she said. "And then I started needing it. And by the time I understood what that meant, I was already—" She exhaled. "Here." "Here," he said, "with you making coffee and reading contracts on the couch and leaving plates in the refrigerator and rearranging my entire approach to board presentations." A pause. "Falling for you wasn't dramatic. It was just gradual and then complete. Like I turned around one day and there it was." The apartment was warm now. The heater had done its job. The December night pressed against the windows, and the lamp in the corner cast the specific low light that this room had in the evenings. And Landon looked at this woman who had just taken herself apart with the precision she applied to quarterly projections and said the true thing with the same clarity she used for difficult boardrooms. He moved down the couch. Not all the way, just enough. "I need you to know something about Marigold," he said. She turned to face him. "She already—" He stopped. He wasn't sure how to do this without it being too much or too little. "She already talks about you. In the matter-of-fact way she talks about things that are simply part of her life. She told my mother that you know about puzzles and that you smell like the good shampoo." He held Victoria's gaze. "She doesn't make those decisions consciously. She just includes you. And I need you to know that because it means this isn't just about us, whatever we're deciding here." Victoria was very still. "I'm not telling you that to pressure you," he said. "I'm telling you so you have the full information, the way you said, so there are no misunderstandings built on." She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched something move through her expression that was not the composed CEO and not the woman braced for family impact. Something younger and less defended, something that looked like being genuinely reached. "I know," she said softly. "I know what it means. I wouldn't be here if I didn't understand what it meant." "Okay," he said. "I want it," she said. "All of it. The complicated shape of it." A beat. "I want Marigold to be part of whatever this is. I'm not afraid of that. I'm afraid of doing it badly, of not knowing how, but not of it." "You're already doing it," he said. "The puzzle, the middle pieces." She looked at him. "You figured it out without being told," he said. "You didn't need instructions. You just sat down on the floor and solved it with her." He paused. "That's not nothing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She named that frog so well." He laughed. Genuinely, the tension of the last hour releasing into it. She smiled, and it was the smile that changed her whole face, the one that happened without management. "Gerald was a good frog," he said. "Gerald was a great frog," she said, "and she drew him in purple, which is actually the right call. She'll be very gratified to hear that from you." They looked at each other. The room was warm and the light was low, and outside the city was being the city, going on at its own pace with its own indifference. He reached across the distance between them and took her hand. She looked down at it, then up at him, and then she leaned forward and kissed him. Not dramatically, not with the weight of the whole preceding narrative pressed into it, but simply the way you do something you've been heading toward long enough that when it arrives it feels less like a beginning than a recognition. He kissed her back. She put her free hand against the side of his face in a gesture that was entirely unplanned and entirely herself, and for a moment they were just two people in a warm apartment in December doing the thing they should have done a while ago. When they pulled back, she was looking at him with an expression that was open in a way she rarely allowed. Not the composed face, not the managed face, just her face. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She leaned into his shoulder. He let her. The lamp in the corner kept its light. The December wind kept its sound. Gerald's six-legged portrait looked down from the refrigerator in the kitchen. They sat there for a while and let the new thing settle into its own shape. The weeks that followed were ordinary in all the ways that mattered, and extraordinary in the one way that did. Nothing announced itself. There was no single moment of declaration, no scene that marked the transition from what they'd been to what they were now. Just the same apartment, the same rhythms, the same coffee, and the same mornings, except that the distance had changed. The careful management was gone. In its place was something less defended and considerably more complicated, in the way that real things are more complicated than the things you build to keep real things out. They were bad at certain parts of it, which was correct. Victoria had a reflex, honed over years, of pulling back when she felt she'd shown too much. It showed up in small ways, a conversation that went deep, and then a day where she was brisk and preoccupied, re-erecting a wall she'd forgotten to leave up. The first time it happened, 3 days after the couch, Landon noticed it and said nothing, which was the right call. The second time, a week later, he said, "You do this thing." She looked up from her laptop. "What thing?" When something gets real, you work late for 2 days. Her jaw tightened slightly. I have an actual workload. I know. I'm not saying it's not real work. He kept his voice even. I'm just naming the pattern, so you know I see it. She looked at him. The tightness didn't leave her jaw immediately. And what do you expect me to do with that? Nothing, he said. I just wanted you to know I'm not going anywhere because of it. You don't have to manage the distance with me. There's no cost. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed the laptop. I'm working on it, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to be fixed. I'm just here. She looked at him with the expression that was still learning how to receive that. Okay, she said. He had his own problems. He woke up some mornings with a specific weight, not about Victoria, but about the architecture of it. The thing his ex-wife had said when she left, phrased with more pain than cruelty, but no less true for that. You make a home, and then you live inside it, and forget to check whether the other person is still there. He'd been working on that since. He didn't always know if he'd made progress. He had a tendency, under pressure, to organize his feelings into logistics and solve the logistics and think he'd solved the feelings. He told her this one evening, flat out, because she'd asked why he'd been quiet all day, and he'd started to say work and stopped himself. I'm afraid of getting so good at managing the life that I stopped paying attention to the people in it, he said. She looked at him across the kitchen table. You've been paying attention to me since November. I know. I'm not saying I'm doing it. I'm saying I'm afraid of it. That's different from doing it. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then we tell each other, she said. When we feel it happening, we don't wait until it's too far. She paused. That's what I should have done with Daniel. I felt it happening, the shrinking, and I didn't say it. I just got smaller and smaller until I couldn't recognize the smaller version of myself. She held his gaze. I'm not doing that again, and I'm not going to let you disappear into logistics while I'm sitting right here. You'll call me on it, he said. Immediately, she said. Probably loudly. That's fair. It's very fair. He smiled. She smiled back. The kitchen table between them had accumulated months of this. The real conversations, the honest ones, the ones that said the difficult thing because the difficult thing was better than the alternative. But Marigold found out on a Thursday. Not through a conversation. There was no conversation because neither of them had figured out exactly how to have the conversation, and they'd been putting it off in the way you put off a thing that seems to require more preparation than it turns out to. What happened instead was that Marigold came back from school on the Thursday before Christmas break, dropped her backpack by the door, went to the kitchen for a snack, and found Victoria at the counter making the carbonara she'd finally committed to executing, and Landon behind her reading the instructions off her phone because she refused to look at it while cooking because it broke her concentration. A little more, he said. It says to keep pulling the pan. I am pulling the pan. You're moving the pan. Pulling is different. That makes no sense. The pasta needs to... You're not the one cooking. I'm reading the instructions. Marigold stood in the kitchen doorway watching this exchange. She looked at Victoria. She looked at her father. She looked at Victoria again. Are you and Daddy together? She asked. They both stopped. The pan was still. The carbonara simmered with the indifference of food being cooked in the middle of a different kind of scene. Landon looked at his daughter. She was 7 months from 7 years old and had, in her short life, developed the precision of a person who asked questions when she wanted answers rather than attention. She was not asking because she was afraid. She was asking because she'd noticed something and wanted the information. Yeah, Landon said. We are. Marigold nodded slowly. She looked at Victoria. Does that mean you're staying? Victoria set the spoon down. She crouched to Marigold's level with the careful grace of someone who wanted to get this right. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I live here, same as always. That part doesn't change. But the other part changed, Marigold said. The other part changed, Victoria confirmed. Marigold appeared to process this for a moment with the specific philosophical patience of a child running an important calculation. Then she said, Can I have more of the good shampoo for Christmas? The tension in the kitchen dissolved. Landon pressed his hand briefly over his mouth. Victoria's expression cycled through 4 things in 2 seconds and arrived at something that looked like relief. "I'll get you the whole bottle," Victoria said. Marigold nodded, satisfied, and went to the refrigerator for her apple juice. Crisis navigated. Information filed. Life continuing. Landon looked at Victoria from across the kitchen. She was looking at him with the expression she wore when something had gone better than she'd built herself to expect, and there was still a little moisture in her eyes that she was deciding not to acknowledge, and she turned back to the carbonara and picked up the spoon. "Pull," she said. "What?" "You said pulling was different. Show me." He crossed the kitchen and took the pan handle. She stepped aside and watched, and he pulled the pan the way the video wanted, and the sauce moved the way it was supposed to. And from the living room came the sound of Marigold turning on a cartoon at maximum volume, and the apartment was full, in the specific way of homes that contain multiple people who have chosen each other. The carbonara was, by consensus, excellent. Christmas came and went in the shape of the life they were building, which meant it was imperfect and specific, and theirs. Marigold spent Christmas Eve at his mother's and Christmas morning at the apartment, which had been his tradition since the first year after Tara left. Wake up at home, presents, breakfast, then out to the family. This year, Victoria was in the home part, which Marigold treated as a natural extension of existing facts rather than a development requiring adjustment. She had her gifts, including the shampoo, which she opened with reverence, and Victoria had gotten her a box of specialty-colored pencils in 72 colors with a small art book, which Marigold regarded with the silence of someone confronted with something genuinely significant. "There's a burnt sienna," Marigold said, examining the label. "I know," Victoria said. "I thought you could use it for Gerald. Purple for the body, but burnt sienna for the details." Marigold looked at her. "That's actually good," she said. The professional respect in the voice of a 6-year-old was objectively funny, and Landon watched Victoria receive it with the straight face of someone who understood that this was the only review that mattered today. His mother came for dinner in the evening. She walked in and registered Victoria's presence in the apartment with the satisfaction of someone whose theory had been proven correct. And she sat down and talked to Victoria for 45 minutes about things Landon couldn't fully follow from the kitchen where he was managing the bird. And when he came in to check on them, they were in the middle of a conversation about what it had been like to run a business in the early years, his mother having done it herself. And Victoria was leaning forward in the way she leaned when she was getting real information from a real source. His mother caught his eye over Victoria's shoulder and did nothing visible. She didn't need to. After dinner, after Marigold had fallen asleep on the couch under a blanket and his mother had gone home and the dishes were either done or consciously deferred, he and Victoria stood in the kitchen with the leftovers and the quiet of a day that had been full and was now settling. "Your mother approves," Victoria said. "My mother approved 3 months ago." "She told me." A pause. "She said she could tell by the way your shoulders sit differently when I'm in the room." He looked at her. "She said that." Verbatim. Victoria was watching him with a small private pleasure. "Apparently you carry your shoulders higher when you're comfortable somewhere. She's been monitoring your shoulders for 32 years and considers herself an authority." He looked at the ceiling briefly. "That's extremely useful information," Victoria said. "You're going to use that against me." "I'm going to use it to understand you better." She set the container she was holding in the refrigerator and turned to face him. "Which is not the same thing." "Mostly." He crossed the kitchen and kissed her, which required no examination or decision, just the doing of the thing that had become natural. She kissed him back with the ease of someone who had stopped negotiating with themselves about it. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Merry Christmas," she said. Behind them, from the living room, Marigold said in the slightly blurred voice of someone half asleep, "You're kissing." "We are," Landon said without turning. A pause. "That's weird," she said. "You'll get used to it," he said. Silence, then definitively, "Okay." She was asleep again in 4 minutes. They could tell by the breathing. January arrived with the cold that Chicago saved for January, the kind that had opinions about it, and with it came the particular quality of a new year in a life that was changing shape. Victoria was working on something. He noticed it in the way she got quiet about things she was usually direct about. Not evasive, not closed off, but holding something. She had her thinking face on more than usual, the one that appeared when she was running a long calculation that required the kind of focus that crowded other things out. He gave it space. He understood by now that she processed in solitude before she processed out loud, and that the way to get the real version of what she was thinking was to not reach for it before it was ready. On a Tuesday night in the middle of January, she came home later than usual and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter, and he was at the kitchen table and she said, "I want to talk to you about something." He put down what he was reading. "Okay." She turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at him with the direct steadiness she used for important things. "I've been looking at apartments." He waited. "Bigger ones," she said, "in neighborhoods that work for school logistics, with a second bedroom that's big enough to actually be a bedroom and not a closet with ambition." He was very still. "Not because I want to change what we have," she said, reading his expression with the accuracy she'd developed over 14 months. "But because what we have has outgrown the space." She held his gaze. "We are 2 adults and a child who all live here now, effectively, and this apartment is 900 square feet, and Marigold has been sleeping on a pull-out when she's here 3 nights a week, which is not—" She paused. "She should have a room. Her room. Here. Somewhere she knows is hers." He didn't say anything. "I found a place," she said, "on Wrightwood. 3 bedrooms, real ones. There's a park 2 blocks away, and the school district boundaries work, and it has a kitchen that can fit 2 people in it without someone having to climb over the other." She stopped. "I want to show it to you. I'm not deciding this without you. It's a decision for both of us." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Gerald the frog looked down with his 6 legs and his purple sincerity. "You've been planning this," he said. "I've been thinking about it. Planning is a strong word. You found a specific apartment. I found a list of specific apartments and narrowed it to one and scheduled a viewing." A pause. "Okay, planning." He looked at her. The woman across from him had spent 11 months being his roommate, 2 months being the person he loved, and somewhere in the quiet of the new year had begun planning a home for the 3 of them, as though it were a natural next step. Not because it was simple, but because she'd decided it was right. And when Victoria Sinclair decided something was right, she moved. "When's the viewing?" he said. "Saturday," she said. 11 in the morning. Marigold could come. She'd want to pick her room." "I know." "She'll pick whatever has the best light." "Then we should hope the best light is also the reasonable choice." He stood up from the table and crossed to where she was standing at the counter, and stood close enough that she had to look up slightly. "You were just going to do this," he said. "Figure out the next thing and bring me the answer." "I was going to bring you the question," she said. "The apartment is a question, not an answer. A very specific question." "I work in specifics." She held his gaze. "Is the question too much?" He looked at her, at the face that had learned over months to stay visible when it wanted to retreat, at the woman who had started planning a life with a single father and his daughter with the same careful intensity she brought to Q4 projections, because that was who she was. Not impulsive, not dramatic, but decided. Quietly, completely decided. "No," he said. "It's not too much." She exhaled, one small release of held breath. "Saturday at 11, he said. "We'll bring Marigold." She nodded. Something in her eyes was bright with the things she didn't entirely permit herself to show, and she looked down briefly and then back up, and she was composed again, or close enough. "I made an offer condition on your approval," she said, "in case you want to negotiate the terms." "Of course you did. I had leverage and a timeline." "You're impossible," he said, without heat. "You knew that when you answered the ad," she said. He had. He'd known it the moment she opened the door in a blazer and bare feet and looked at his references for 30 seconds and said, "When can you move in?" He'd known something was specific about this woman, this apartment, this arrangement, and he'd moved in and waited to understand what the specificity meant. And now he was standing in a kitchen on a January night looking at the person who had spent months quietly building the architecture of something permanent. He kissed her. She leaned into it. The apartment held its breath around them. Outside, Chicago in January was being entirely itself, relentless and cold and indifferent to the people inside it deciding their futures. The wind off the lake did its work. The city moved at its own pace. In here, the future was taking shape in small, deliberate increments. A Saturday viewing, a room with good light, a purple frog on a refrigerator. A little girl who had accepted the changing shape of her family with the practical grace of someone who had always known that some families were shaped differently, and that different shapes could still hold everything that mattered. Landon Brooks stood in his kitchen in the life he had rebuilt from what remained, and felt the rebuilt thing become something new. Not a recovery, not a return, but a different country entirely. One he hadn't planned for and was finding, against every careful instinct he possessed, that he didn't want to leave. He put his arm around her. She stayed where she was. That was enough. For tonight, that was everything. I noticed this is a request for part 5, the final part, based on the outline, but the prompt says part 2. I'll treat this as the final part 5. Since parts 1 to 4 are already complete, and write it at 6,000 to 6,500 words as requested. The apartment on Wrightwood was on the 3rd floor of a gray stone building that had been standing since 1923 and looked like it knew it. The hallway smelled like old wood and someone's cooking from a lower floor, and the elevator was the slow, deliberate kind that made you aware of exactly how many floors you were ascending. Marigold rode it with her hands pressed flat against the walls, monitoring the vibration. "It's thinking," she said. "Elevators don't think," Landon said. "This one does." The elevator stopped. The door opened. Their real estate agent, a compact woman named Sandra, who had the cheerful efficiency of someone who had shown 300 apartments and still found each one interesting, led them down the hall to Unit 3C and unlocked the door and stepped back. Marigold walked in first. She did this without discussion. Just walked past the adults with the authority of someone whose assessment mattered and began a systematic inspection of the space, moving from the entryway into the living room, pausing at the windows, then disappearing around the corner toward the bedrooms. Landon walked in behind her. Victoria came in last and stood just inside the doorway for a moment, her hands in her coat pockets, looking at the room with the particular stillness she got when something was being evaluated seriously. The apartment was bigger than theirs. Substantially. The living room had north and east light, a wood floor with the specific dignity of old buildings, and enough wall space to hold a life's worth of accumulated objects without feeling crowded. The kitchen was separate, a real one, with a window above the sink that looked out onto the street below. There was a dining room that wasn't an afterthought. 2 of the bedrooms were at the back. From the back of the apartment, Marigold called, "This one!" They found her in the smaller of the 2 back bedrooms, standing in the center of the room, looking up at the ceiling. The room had a single window on the south wall that let in the flat January light at an angle that made everything in it look considered. "This one?" Landon said. "The light is good," she said in the tone she'd been using since Victoria told her about burnt sienna and good light. She pointed up. "And the ceiling is high." "You're not tall enough to matter about the ceiling," he said. "I will be eventually." Victoria was standing in the doorway looking at the room. Her expression had the brightness in it again, the kind she was getting better at not immediately concealing. "Good bones," she said quietly to no one in particular. Sandra appeared behind her and said something about square footage that none of them really heard, because Marigold had already moved to the window and was looking down at the street below with the serious focus of someone surveying a territory. "Can I put my drawing table here?" she said. "By the window?" "If that's the room, sure," Landon said. "It's the room," she said. Decided. Filed. He looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at him. Sandra had the good professional instinct to find something to look at on her clipboard. They put in the offer that afternoon. Victoria handled the mechanics of it with her usual organized precision, going through the documents with Sandra at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the building while Marigold ate a chocolate chip cookie with the focus it deserved, and Landon read through the terms at a pace that was slower than Victoria's but not slower than warranted. "Here," Victoria said, pointing to a clause about the inspection contingency. "I see it. The window is 30 days. I want to push to 21. "Why?" because 30 days is too much time for a competing offer to come in, and the inspection on a building this age will come back with cosmetic items regardless, so the extra 9 days are exposure without return. He looked at her. You've done this before. I bought my company's office space 3 years ago. She circled the number. I know what I'm doing. I'm not questioning whether you know what you're doing. You had your skeptical face on. I have a face I use when I'm paying attention, he said. It might look skeptical. She looked at him for a moment. Then she made the note about the contingency window and moved to the next page. He watched her work and thought about the Saturday morning on the couch a month ago. The conversation that had become the first real one. The one where she'd said gradual and then complete. And thought about how little she resembled the person he'd been afraid she might be, which was the person she showed to rooms full of people who needed to believe she was certain of everything. He was getting to know the other version, the one who burned the first batch of carbonara and ate it anyway and didn't mention it for 4 days. The one who left her half-finished tea on every flat surface in the apartment and then looked mildly surprised when she found them there. The one who cried once at a documentary about a dog and immediately changed the subject to infrastructure policy when she noticed him noticing. The one who, when Marigold had a bad dream on a Wednesday night and wandered into the hallway at 2 a.m, had been the first one to hear her and had gone and sat with her on the pullout until she fell back asleep, not waking Landon because she'd decided he needed the sleep and she was handling it, which he'd found out about the next morning from Marigold, not from Victoria. He was learning the shape of her. It was irregular in all the right ways. Stop looking at me like that, she said without looking up from the document. Like what? Like you're filing something. Maybe I am. She looked up. He held her gaze. She looked back at the document, but the corner of her mouth had moved. The offer went in at 4 o'clock. Sandra said they'd likely hear by Monday. They drove home in the early dark of a January afternoon, Marigold asleep in the back seat before they'd made it 4 blocks, and Victoria rode with her face toward the passenger window, watching the city go past. And Landon drove and didn't need to fill the silence, because silence between them had stopped being empty a long time ago. They heard on Sunday. The offer was accepted. Victoria got the call in the kitchen and said, "Good, thank you. I'll review the next steps," in her professional voice, and hung up and stood there for a moment and then said to the general apartment, "They accepted." From the living room, Marigold said, "The room with the good light?" "The room with the good light," Victoria confirmed. Marigold went back to whatever she was drawing. Victoria set the phone on the counter and looked at it, and then looked at Landon, who was in the kitchen doorway, and her expression was the full permission one, the one without management. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She pressed her lips together briefly, not suppressing something, just feeling it fully before it passed. He crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her, and she let him, and for a moment they stood in the 900-square-foot apartment that had been the home for everything that had happened between them. And he thought about Craigslist and a blazer and bare feet, and the way a person's whole life can be altered by something as small as answering an ad because the rent was too high somewhere else. "We have to tell my mother," she said, into his shoulder. "I know. She's going to have opinions about the neighborhood. She has opinions about everything. She's going to ask about the school. I'll have the information ready." She pulled back and looked at him. "You're going to prepare a briefing document. I'm going to have the relevant facts available." "That's a briefing document." "That's project management." "It's the same—" She stopped. "You know what? Fine. Make the briefing document. She'll respect it." He kissed her on the forehead because it was the right distance for the moment, and she let it land. The call to Patricia happened that evening, and it went the way things with Patricia went, which was to say more dimensions than a simple phone call had any business containing, but nothing insurmountable. Victoria called from the couch with the phone on speaker, which had become the default for family calls. And Landon sat at the other end and was not performing presence. He was simply present, which was a distinction that had taken him a while to understand, but that he understood now completely. Patricia picked up on the second ring. "Victoria." "Hi, Mom." "You sound different." A beat. "Something happened." "Something happened. We're moving." Silence. Not the hostile kind. the processing kind. Together, Patricia said. Together. You and Landon. And Marigold, Victoria said. 3 bedrooms, Wrightwood, near the park. Another pause. Is this certain? This isn't... It's certain, Mom. The offer was accepted today. Landon watched Victoria's face during the silence that followed, the way she held the phone slightly away from her body, the way her jaw was set with the readiness for impact that he still saw sometimes when she braced for her mother. He reached over and put his hand on her knee, not saying anything. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. That's a serious step, Patricia said finally. I know. Does he understand what you need? The kind of... Mom, I'm asking a real question. I know you are. Victoria's voice was even. And the answer is yes, he does. In a way I didn't think someone would. She paused. He pays attention. That's what I needed. And I didn't know how to say it, but that's it. He pays attention without me having to ask. Silence. Your father will want to visit, Patricia said. Good. Come in the spring when we're settled. I'll want to see the room. We can video call before then. That's not the same. No, it's not. Victoria's voice softened by a degree. Come in the spring, Mom. We'll have space for you. A long pause. Then Patricia said, He makes you happy. It was not phrased as a question. It was the statement of a woman who had been watching something from a distance and had arrived at a conclusion. Yes, Victoria said. Good. A short exhale. That's what matters. I don't always lead with that. I know I don't always lead with that. Another pause, the kind that had the weight of a long history behind it. But it's what matters. Victoria's expression went briefly to something Landon didn't try to name, something between relief and grief and gratitude, the complicated territory of being finally understood by someone whose understanding you had stopped expecting. I know, Mom, she said. We'll come in April, Patricia said. April's good. After the call ended, Victoria set the phone on the cushion and sat for a moment with the particular quiet of someone surfacing from deep water. She's trying, Landon said. She is. Victoria leaned back into the couch. She's been trying since the breakfast. In her way. A pause. I've been trying to let her. That's hard. It is. She turned her head toward him. But it's better than the alternative, which is what I had for a long time. She shifted, moving closer, settling her shoulder against his. April's a long time away. 4 months? She'll probably call 6 times before then. That's manageable. She'll have opinions about the kitchen. The kitchen is good. The kitchen is fine. She'll want to talk about cabinets. We can discuss cabinets. Victoria looked at him. You realize you're agreeing to have a relationship with my mother. I had a relationship with your mother starting the moment she found my jacket on the hook. That's fair. She was quiet for a moment. She told me in December. She texted me. She doesn't do well saying these things out loud. She said she was glad I had someone who looked at me the way you do. Victoria paused. I asked her what way that was. She said like I was already the answer to the question, before she'd even finished asking it. The apartment was quiet. The winter dark was complete outside. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm cycled through its repertoire and stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. The lamp in the corner did what it always did. She's right, he said. Victoria's chin dropped slightly. A breath out. Don't, she said. But she was almost smiling. I'm not performing anything, he said. I'm just agreeing with your mother. She pressed her face briefly against his shoulder, which was a gesture she still did with a slight surprise at herself, as if each time she allowed it, she was mildly astonished that she'd chosen to. He put his arm around her. From down the hall, in the direction of the pullout that would, in 4 months, be replaced by a room with good southern light, Marigold's small sleeping sounds were the particular soundtrack of a child who had decided, with characteristic finality, that things were fine. February moved into March with the logic of Chicago seasons, which is to say badly. 2 warm days followed by a week of something that couldn't decide between snow and rain and settled on both simultaneously. The move was scheduled for the third Saturday in March, when the inspection had cleared and the paperwork had concluded its long bureaucratic journey, and the keys were no longer hypothetical. In the weeks before, the apartment on Logan Square took on the particular atmosphere of a place being gently dismantled, boxes appearing in corners, the walls beginning to show the shadows of things that had been on them for over a year. It should have felt like loss. It mostly felt like progress, which was something Landon thought about more than once while taping boxes at 11 o'clock on a weeknight. Victoria packed the way she did most things, with a system, labels on every box. A spreadsheet, which she claimed was not a spreadsheet but was definitely a spreadsheet, tracking the contents of each container and its destination room. He'd teased her about it once, and she'd said, "Do you want to unpack 3 boxes looking for the coffee maker?" And he'd said no, and she'd said, "Then the spreadsheet stays." And he decided this was correct. He packed his own things with less architecture and more sentiment. The drawer that had been Marigold since she started staying over. The shelf where his good books lived spine out. The hook by the door where his jacket had been hanging when Patricia walked in and changed everything. He took the hook down from the wall carefully, the small screw resisting, and put it in a box. "What's that?" Victoria asked, leaning in the doorway. "The hook. We have hooks in the new place." "I know." He looked at it for a moment. "But this one started it." She was quiet. She looked at the small brass hook in his hand, and she looked at him, and she said nothing, which was correct, because there was nothing to add to that. She went back to her labeling. He put the hook in the box and marked it Kitchen Miss and moved on. Moving day arrived with actual sun, which felt like something Chicago offered rarely and without obligation. 3 of Landon's friends from his old crew, Marcus, Pete, and a large, quiet man named Dwight, who communicated primarily in nods but could carry more than anyone else, showed up at 9 with coffee and the energy of men who had agreed to do manual labor for a friend and were making peace with the decision. Victoria's colleague and closest work friend, a woman named Bree, who had the efficient energy of a former athlete and zero patience for anyone who wasn't, showed up at 9:15 and immediately began telling Marcus how to wrap the kitchen plates more securely, which led to a 15-minute negotiation that ended in a draw. Marigold supervised. She did this from various elevated positions, the back of the couch, the kitchen counter with Landon's hand on her back, pointing out when things were being handled incorrectly. She was particularly vocal about the box containing her art supplies, which she escorted personally to the moving truck. By 2 in the afternoon, Logan Square was empty except for the wall shadows and the particular silence of a place that had been a home and was now a set of clean rooms. Landon stood in the living room for a moment after the last box had gone down. 11 months in this room, the throw pillows in the corner, the balcony where they'd sat in November with the borrowed warmth of a season ending, the couch, where she'd sat at 1 in the morning, waiting for him to come home from Detroit, the door 3 inches open, her face unguarded in a way that had told him everything before she'd said a word. He looked at the wall where Gerald had hung. Marigold had taken the drawing down herself and carried it in her backpack, explaining to anyone who asked that it needed to travel safely. Victoria came in from the hallway. She looked at the empty room. She looked at him. "Okay?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I am." She crossed the room and stood beside him, and they looked at the empty space together for a moment. The room that had been the beginning of something that had become something else. The way most real things become something else if you stay in them long enough. "Good start," she said. "Good start," he agreed. They turned off the light and left. The apartment on Wrightwood received them the way new spaces receive people, blankly, waiting to be impressed. Marcus and Pete and Dwight got the furniture up the thinking elevator in 3 loads. Bree directed the placement of the kitchen boxes with the focus of a military operation and had the kitchen functional before anyone else had finished unloading their assigned area. Marigold went directly to the room with the good light and stood in it with her arms crossed while Dwight assembled her bed frame, monitoring each step with professional gravity. By 7 in the evening, the crew had gone. Marigold was asleep in her new room in the room with good light, and the apartment was in the particular beautiful chaos of a first day. Boxes half opened, furniture at approximate locations, the kitchen mostly functional, but the rest of it unresolved. Landon sat on the floor of the living room with his back against the couch they hadn't fully positioned yet, eating pizza from a box because the plates were unpacked, but the paper towels were not, and the calculus had been clear. Victoria sat beside him, not close in the way of performance, but close in the way of people who no longer needed the distance between them. "The shelf goes on the east wall," she said. "Tomorrow." "I know, tomorrow. I'm just—" She gestured at the wall. "I can see it." "You can see the whole room already." "I've been seeing it since January." She took a piece of pizza. "The chair goes there, the lamp there. The good one, not the tall one. The tall one goes in the corner." "Where does the tall one go?" "The corner." "I said the corner." "Which corner?" She pointed. "That corner. That corner has the heater vent." She looked at the corner. She looked at the vent. "Fine. The other corner." "Which other—" "The corner that doesn't have the heater vent, Landon." He ate his pizza. She ate hers. The apartment was quiet in the new space way. Different acoustics, different sounds from the street, the particular audio signature of a building, learning 2 new residents and 1 small girl who was already deeply asleep with her art supplies arranged on the floor beside her bed, like an honor guard. "Tell me something," she said. He looked at her. "Something you haven't told me," she said. "Something real. We're in a new apartment, new start. Tell me something." He thought about it. He wasn't a man who had a lot of unrevealed material. He was fairly direct by nature, once you got through the initial management layer. But there were things that lived in the quiet parts of him that hadn't been asked about yet. "When I was 7, he said, "my parents almost separated. I didn't know that until I was 24 and my mother told me after my own marriage started going wrong." She said they'd come to the same place. 2 people who had built a life together and were standing in it looking at each other and asking if the life was the thing they'd wanted or just the closest thing they'd been able to reach. He paused. She said they decided to choose it, not because it was perfect or because they were, because choosing is different from staying. Staying is just inertia. Choosing means you see what you have and you say, "This. I want this." Victoria was very still beside him. "They were married for 31 more years," he said, "until my father died." He looked at the unresolved wall across from them. "I thought about that a lot after Tara left, about the difference between choosing and staying, about whether I'd been choosing or just staying, and whether she had been too." He paused. "I think we were both staying. I think we never made it to choosing." "What does choosing feel like?" she said. He looked at her. "Like this," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. That full, direct look of hers, the no-management version. "Tell me something," he said. She looked at the unresolved room. "I thought I was going to spend my life alone," she said. "Not as a tragedy. I want to be clear about that. Not with violins, not as a sad story. I looked at my life and I thought, this is efficient. I'm good at it. I have the company, and I have the work, and I don't have to factor in another person's needs. And that's clean." She stopped. But there was this thing I kept running into, these moments that would happen, something good or something hard. And my first reflex was to want to tell someone, not anyone, a specific someone. And for a long time, I didn't know who that was. She looked at him. "And then you moved in. And about 4 months later, I realized that every time something happened, good or hard or just interesting, the person I wanted to tell was already there." The pizza was getting cold. Neither of them reached for it. "The first time I realized it," she said, "was when I closed the Henderson account. It was a deal I'd been working for 8 months, and it came in on a Wednesday morning, and I stood in my office for a minute after the call ended, and my first thought was, I should tell Landon, before my board, before Bree, before my mother." She shook her head slightly. "I called you from the cab home, do you remember?" "I remember," he said. "You were on the bridge." "I was on the bridge and it was cold, and I called you just to say it happened. You said, 'That's the one you've been working since July.' And I said yes, and you said good. You deserve that one. And that was it. That was the whole call. She paused. And I felt better after it than I felt after anyone's congratulations. He put his arm around her. She leaned into it without the small surprise at herself she used to have. She'd been doing this for 2 months now, and the muscle memory was forming, the specific posture of a person who has stopped negotiating with themselves about belonging somewhere. We're going to be okay, she said. I don't say that as it's not a promise I can actually make, because I don't know what's coming. I feel it. I feel it too, he said. We're going to fight about the furniture placement. Already started. And the coffee maker situation. What's wrong with my coffee maker? It's enormous. It takes up 1/3 of the counter. It makes excellent coffee. It makes more coffee than 2 people can drink. Marigold will start drinking coffee. She's 6. She's going to be 7 in April. I think we should start preparing. Victoria turned and looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to be exasperated or amused, and the outcome was genuinely unclear. You're not going to give our 6-year-old coffee. Almost 7. Landon. I'm joking. He paused. Mostly. She pressed her face against the side of his head briefly in a gesture that was somewhere between affection and resignation, which was a fair description of what it was like to be in love with a man who held the coffee maker question this sincerely. The apartment settled around them. The heat came on with the sound of the old building adjusting to the cold outside. Down the hall, Marigold slept with the complete abandon of a child who had accepted her circumstances and found them satisfactory. Gerald's drawing was somewhere in a box. They'd find it tomorrow, and he'd go up on the wall of the room with the good light, and he'd watch over the colored pencils with his 6 legs and his purple sincerity. Outside, on Wrightwood, the March night was doing what March nights in Chicago do. Neither winter nor spring, but something honest in between, the season making no promises, just continuing. The city had no opinion about what was happening on the 3rd floor of the old Greystone. It had its own business, as always. But in here, in the warm and unresolved rooms of a new beginning, 2 people were sitting on the floor eating cold pizza and telling each other true things. It was not a grand scene. It was not the version of love that announces itself. It was the quieter kind, the kind that builds itself from small decisions and repeated choices and the accumulation of mornings, the kind that is less about what you feel in the heights and more about who you are in the ordinary hours. Landon Brooks, at 32, had been a husband and a father and a man rebuilding. He had been careful for long enough that careful had become a posture, a default, a way of holding himself that had started to calcify. And then a door had been 3 inches open on a November night, and a woman had been sitting on a couch she'd rearranged, and everything had moved. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way of real things, slowly and then completely. Victoria Sinclair, at 30, had been a CEO and a daughter and a woman who had learned to be alone so well she'd nearly convinced herself she preferred it. She had built a company from a rented office and 3 employees in the sheer force of what she knew and what she was willing to do. And she was good at it. And it had almost been enough. And then a man had answered an ad because his rent was too high somewhere else. And he had been in the vicinity of her life for long enough that eventually the vicinity had become the center. Their story did not have a clean origin. It had a jacket on a hook and throw pillows rearranged, and a breakfast that got real before anyone was ready, and a phone call on a couch, and a puzzle solved from the middle out, and a 6-legged purple frog who had become, against all reasonable expectation, a household emblem. It had bad days and the things you say when you're tired, and the particular patience required to let another person be imperfect in the specific ways they are imperfect. It had a little girl who had accepted the changing shape of her family with the practical grace of someone who understood, at some level below language, that love is not diminished by being rearranged. Nobody gets to the good things without the cost of the things before them. You pay for what you understand. Landon understood, in his bones, the difference between staying and choosing, and he was choosing. Victoria understood, finally, that love did not have to come with a receipt, that there was a version of it that gave without calculation and asked only that you be the person you actually were. They were both going to be bad at parts of this. They both knew it. The conversation about the coffee maker was probably going to happen 11 more times over the next year. He was going to disappear into logistics on the wrong days and need to be called back. She was going to work late when something felt too real and need to be waited for. Marigold was going to have bad dreams and complicated questions and eventually harder ones. Patricia was going to have opinions about the kitchen cabinets. Robert was going to find his moments. None of that was the obstacle. All of that was the territory. He reached out and took her hand from the pizza box. She laced her fingers through his without looking, the way you do something that has become as natural as breathing. "We should probably sleep," she said. "Probably." Neither of them moved. The lamp they'd found and turned on was the tall one, the one that didn't have a corner yet, standing temporarily in the middle of the room, throwing light in every direction with the undiscriminating generosity of a thing that didn't know it was displaced. It lit the boxes and the half-assembled furniture, and the two people on the floor and the hallway where Marigold slept, and the kitchen where the spreadsheet had organized everything, and the walls that were waiting for the life that was going to fill them. Tomorrow, they would find where the coffee maker fit. They would put Gerald on the wall. They would argue about the tall lamp's corner and probably not resolve it until next week. They would make breakfast in a new kitchen and figure out its specific rhythms, and Marigold would find the colored pencils and test the burnt sienna against the window light and declare a verdict. They would build it, the ordinary way, day by day, with all the difficulty that came with it and all the specific, irreplaceable good. For now, they sat on the floor of the room that was becoming home and held the silence of two people who had found each other through a small door left open on a November night and had chosen, over and over again, in 100 small and deliberate ways, not to let it close. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.